Chapter 402. There were not many officers who came to Zhichou's military spaceport to participate in the small welcoming ceremony. Shula stood below the stage and looked at the soldiers through his sunglasses. He thought that compared to the momentum created on the Westwood's administrative planet, the officers on this planet did not seem to care much about the victory concert. The frontline command headquarters actually only sent a major general. Most of the Federal Army stationed in the southern hemisphere of Planet 5460 were directly subordinate troops of the Westwood's military district. There were only 2 divisions of troops from the capital ring who came to participate in the rotational battle. The frontline command headquarters led the military operations of the entire planet, so at least one lieutenant general was available. Shula did not think that this was the military ignoring the performance team. Instead, he thought that the generals in the headquarters were probably busy with something important. The aftermath of the news could not be calmed down. Although this was the absolute frontier and absolute frontline, the soldiers still knew of Shula's existence through the television and the internet. The soldiers in the formation listened to the unoriginal welcome speech on the rostrum and looked at the national girl on the stage excitedly. Many of them also looked at Shula curiously. This young man who didn't seem to have any abnormalities was that guy from the legends. The sunglasses covered Shula's eyes. He did not care about the strange looks around him. Under the cover of the sunglasses, no one knew that he, who was silent with his hands behind his back, was actually having a direct communication with a great being. A faint light appeared in his left eye. The old man did not seem to like to appear in his mind with the face of the old butler. Instead, he used the light talismans to communicate with him directly. I think this is a big deal, but I don't know when the Department of Defense will tell the truth about the mission. Shula thought in his mind. I'm carrying out a military mission. If something really happens to the concert, you have to help me. I can't let anything happen to Jen Shueya. The glory of the charter was an invisible existence, but in his left eye, rows of characters could be seen with the naked eye. A row of characters flashed. The electronic monitoring network in the Northern Hemisphere has been completely destroyed. Less than 2% is left. It is unable to support the overall monitoring calculation. The Southern Hemisphere is 47% complete. The overall monitoring calculation can be attempted. Can I know what the DOD is doing in secret? You don't have the authority in this area, but I think you will receive a new mission soon. Shula understood what he meant. He stood silently in the sunshine of Zhichou Airport. According to the old man, as long as he stayed in the Southern Hemisphere, he could protect himself and Jen Shueya no matter what the people of the Empire in the North did or what the Department of National Defense secretly planned. After the simple welcome ceremony, the concert team left Zhichou Airport with the guidance vehicle and military police sent by the frontline command and headed north. The further north they went, the hotter they felt. The clear sky outside the black car seemed like it could burn up at any time. Jen Shueya sat in the back with her eyes wide open. She looked at the wreckage of fighter jets that could often be seen on both sides of the road and the armored vehicles that had been burned into black soil. Her clear eyes did not burn, but there was a faint sadness in them. In the following journey, Jen Shueya, accompanied by military officials, came to the 3rd hospital of the planet to visit the wounded soldiers who were receiving treatment. The soldiers who were seriously injured on the battlefield would be transported back to the main planet of the Westwoods for treatment. But because of the limited transport capacity, a large number of the wounded were still receiving treatment on the spot. They would be transferred after their condition stabilized. In the intensive care ward of the sterile space on the 2nd floor, there were many soldiers who were permanently disabled. Some of them had their legs blown off by anti-infantry mines, some of them had their arms cut off by high-speed rotating bullets scattered by the Empire mecha, and some of them had most of their skin burned by the incendiary bombs dropped from the sky. Jen Shueya, who was wearing a light blue sterile suit, did not just say a few words of encouragement to the soldiers and leave the hospital. Instead, she sat quietly beside the bed and began to talk to the seriously injured soldiers. The national girl came to his side. Her clear voice was filled with sunshine, bringing warmth and comfort to these soldiers who had suffered heavy blows. The gloomy and even somewhat desperate atmosphere in the ward changed a lot because of her arrival. Jen Shueya softly sang a song for them. She turned her head and said cutely, "I'm so useless." When he said this, even the second lieutenant, who had 70% of his burn area, laughed. It was just that his heavily injured face hadn't had time to undergo skin grafting and muscle regeneration surgery, so he looked abnormally terrifying. Especially when he laughed, one could actually see the pink muscle fibers on his left cheek and the white teeth that were exposed in the air. Not everyone dared to look at this face. Most of the team members who came to visit the wounded stayed away from this bed. Sister Tong had a look of pity on her face as she quietly stood behind. Only Jian Shuya sat beside him, and Shula stood behind her. Shula watched silently. He did not know how many people he had killed in his life and how many bloody and cruel scenes he had seen. But when he looked at a severely burned soldier, he still felt cold and numb in his heart. However, he did not see a trace of disgust on Jian Shuya's pink cheeks. What impressed him even more was that the national girl did not show any expression of pity. She just smiled cutely, as if the burned soldier on the bed was an extremely ordinary person. Not far behind the 3rd Military Hospital was the graveyard. After the news reporter finished filming the scene of Jian Shuya offering flowers to the hero's cemetery, he was politely asked to leave. In the green grassland, Shula walked slowly with Jian Shuya. He saw that the girl's eyes were already wet. For decades, in order to resist the invasion of the empire, countless young and hot-blooded people had been buried here. Only close to 4,000 of these soldiers were buried in this cemetery. However, as far as the eye could see, all one could see were black tombstones in the gentle green grassland. They didn't seem like lush trees, but rather like black gems scattered throughout the grassland. Looking at this scene, there was no fear of death in the hearts of the two of them. There was only a faint sadness and respect. Jian Shuya turned around. Her big eyes were full of a strong smile and tears that she had not had time to wipe away. She said, "Many people died for victory. If we do something for this, it is very reasonable, right? Yes, so you have to hold a victory concert." It was not as simple as a concert. Although the old man insisted on maintaining his authority and did not tell Shula the top-secret military information, he was sure that his deduction would not be wrong through his own observations these days. Leaving the hospital and the cemetery, he entered the frontline military camp. Looking at the multi-level automatic farms watered by water droplets and listening to the sounds of cards in the barracks around him that were filled with Westwood's accents, Shula was slightly stunned. He felt as if he had returned to the training base. The sun here was so bright that he really did not feel the tension of an impending war. Turning around the barracks, there were countless soldiers on the field undergoing close combat training under the scorching sun. Battle cries shook the sky. Although armed infantrymen rarely had the chance to meet the Empire's soldiers, the soldiers of the Federation had never forgotten the bloodlust that close combat training could bring to them. The camouflage military uniforms had long been rubbed by the dirt and stones. The soldiers' bodies fell heavily on the hard ground, and then they climbed up resolutely. The battle cries and the orderly landing of the soldiers soared into the sky. It was so exciting that the people in the convoy were thirsty. The earth trembled slightly. 7 black M52 mechas walked out from behind the barracks. The heavy mechas towered over the canopy of the trees. They moved silently in the wind, as if they were returning home. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, Shula finally smiled when he saw this scene. Being on the front line, he could truly confirm that he was indeed very used to this kind of battlefield atmosphere. Even his body was beginning to itch. Jian Shuya in the back saw the sunny smile on his face. Thinking that the Ministry of Defense would probably not hand over the mission to Group 7 until after the concert, she asked curiously, "What are you thinking about?" Shula smiled, revealing a mouth full of healthy white teeth. He said, "I'm thinking that no matter what might happen at the concert, no matter what the Ministry of Defense wants me to do. But if those Empire people really dare to come to the south, this young master will definitely make them regret it a little." The convoy entered the base. The MX Mecha that had been closely guarded was transferred into the heavily guarded warehouse. The concert was set for 2 days later. The relevant technical installation and rehearsals would begin tonight. The concert broadcast organization had already arrived at Planet 5460 10 days ago. The concert stage had already been set up. All that was left was for the engineers in Jen Shuea's team to perform the final adjustments. Of course, the broadcast organization for the Victory concert could only be the Federation television station. From the age of 12, Jen Shuea had cooperated with the Federation television station for all of her drama interviews and concert broadcasts. The two parties had cooperated countless times and were already very familiar with each other. Shula stood behind Jen Shuea. Seeing her smiling and greeting every staff member of the television station with a friendly and cute smile, an inexplicable sense of pride welled up in his heart. This was the uncle's daughter, the dream lover of his adolescence. She was indeed worthy of his love. However, no one noticed that at the side of the concert venue, the pulse balancing system of the high-power signal relay station had a momentary imbalance. It seemed that some kind of external signal was invading. It's a pity that we can't go and see the grand scene of the concert with our own eyes. Logically speaking, the rehearsal tonight should have given our fleet some signal. In the command hall of the Federal Fleet's flagship outside the planet's atmosphere, a middle-aged commander held a cup of coffee and looked at the brightly colored planet under his feet and said emotionally, "This Federation medium-sized fleet was composed of the Sinew series battleships." The commander of the fleet was a female major general in her 40s, Hong Yujing. She was the sister of the commander of the Federal Fleet, Hong Yuliang. Major General Hong Yuliang smiled and said, "The concert will be broadcasted to the entire Federation the day after tomorrow. We will be able to see it all the same." Her deputy commander suddenly frowned and asked in a low voice, "Wasting so much energy and leaving the fleet here just to ensure the smooth performance of a concert? I don't know what the Department of Defense is thinking when they spend so much energy." Major General Hong Yujing looked at him quietly and said with a smile, "Because this is a concert called Victory." Chapter 403. Major General Hong Yujing didn't explain further to her deputy, because the secret military order was only passed to officers at her level, and it wasn't announced to the lower ranks. The Federation set up such a trap for the Imperial Expeditionary Force, so naturally, they didn't want to reveal any flaws from top to bottom. In fact, even she didn't know why the Ministry of Defense came up with such a plan. This plan seemed a bit naive and stupid. Would the Imperial Expeditionary Force really lose their mind and give up the defensive strategy that the enemy had persisted for more than a decade just because of that national girl? From her sister, General Hong Yuliang, she even knew that when President Parbre passed this military plan called the Victory Concert, he still didn't understand where the Ministry of Defense's confidence came from. However, in the end, President Prabal still made up his mind and passed this military plan. Just like the respectable president, Captain Hong Yujing did not understand, but she accepted it without any resistance. She also made meticulous tactical deductions and preparations for the upcoming war. Because this plan came from the old man beside Feiqing Lake. To the senior generals of the federal government and the military, the old man had long since taken off his martial uniform and returned to the lake. However, in the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, he once again stood up. What kind of inconceivable yet incomparably exciting news was this? The universe had been peaceful for too long, and the Federation had been waiting for too long. They couldn't tolerate the Empire's expeditionary force on their own land anymore. When the god of war made his move, the world was in chaos. No one knew why the wise and powerful old man forced this military plan, but everyone in the Federation firmly believed that under the wise leadership of the god of war, they would definitely win. Major General Hong Yujing knew that the mission of her fleet was to cover Jen Shuea's departure, but she also knew that if the Imperial Expeditionary Force really attacked, that old Fox Amberry would definitely not miss her. But could the Imperial Expeditionary Force calculate that the Federation spent a few months to set up a diversion just to bury a surprise force there? She looked at the planet below the porthole of the battleship. She looked at the light yellow mountain range at the intersection of white and green on the surface of the planet. She smiled and smoothed the wrinkles on her forehead. Looking from space, the mountain range looked pale yellow, but in reality, you would find that the mountain range was a deep brownish yellow. Other than a few green plants on the mountainside, the entire mountain range was barren. There was no trace of life, and it was lonely. Therefore, the highest peak in the mountain range was called the Lonely Mountain Range. That's the Lonely Mountain Range. Behind us is the Yellow Mountain Range. A few months ago at the training base, you should understand what it means by now. Behind a giant sunken rock, Du Shaoqing, the commander of the Iron 7th Division of the Federation's 3rd Military Region, coldly looked at the surroundings and said to Shimin Jin, who was standing behind him, "You came later than the troops, so take the time to familiarize yourself with the tactical plan." "Yes, teacher." Shimin Jin had just arrived at planet 5460 not long ago. He was not wearing a military hat today, and his slightly dry black hair swayed in the dry wind of the Yellow Mountains. The Ministry of National Defense has prepared for so long, and even let the key military officers to cooperate with our maneuver to improve our understanding of this ambush. If we still can't win this battle, all of you will go back to S3 to be clerks. Du Shaoqing said coldly. All the military officers behind him had serious expressions. They all stood at attention and said in a deep voice, "We will complete the mission." Behind this group of military officers, countless firepower equipment suitable for mountainous warfare were undergoing the final adjustment and camouflage. Behind the artillery position, some large equipment was covered with dark yellow camouflage cloth. It was hard to tell what it was, but it looked like it was a mecha. The entire Iron 7th Division was now distributed between the Yellow Mountain Range and the Silent Mountain Range. However, with so many people and so many equipment, they did not make any noise or leave any traces on the mountain road. The tactical quality of the division was fully demonstrated during this preparation process. The results of the Ministry of National Defense's tactical deduction are out. A staff officer walked behind Du Shaoqing and said in a low voice. Then, with a pull of his hands, he opened the scroll-like electronic map and quickly operated with his hands, marking the places that needed attention. He explained to him and the officers around him, whether it's a feint or a full-scale attack, since the Department of Defense has determined that the other party is the target, we can't do anything. Then the opponent must attack Ziyiqiu Airport before the warship takes off, thus forcing the target to move west from the concert location and leave the planet through Luoqiu Airport. The Yellow Mountain Range is the only route they have to pass through. Just to confuse our line of sight, there will definitely be a full force attack on the line of demarcation. The opponent may not use a lot of power to carry out a surprise attack, but until now, the Ministry of National Defense has not determined how much power the Empire will put into this route. Outside of the Wolf Moon Mecha Brigade, how much firepower will there be? I don't want to know how many troops the Empire will send. Du Shaoqing looked at the ambush position under his feet and lightly waved his black lambskin gloves. He said with a rare emotion, "Since we are back, we can only leave with victory." Many years ago, this planet was the place where the Iron 7th Division had been reborn. During the Second Federal Defense War, the Iron 7th Division had single-handedly completed an inconceivable task of stopping 3 of the Empire's integrated brigades, buying precious time for the Federation's main forces to surround them. However, the Iron 7th Division had paid the price of being almost completely annihilated. The Iron 7th Division won glory in the end, but they did not receive the respect of the federal military. This was because the Veterans Association and the media who promoted the Iron 7th Division's achievements did not know the story behind that tragic attack. In that defensive battle decades ago, the previous commander and senior officers of the 7th Division missed the opportunity and were cowardly, causing a fatal strategic flaw to appear in the military's plan. The situation was very critical, and their entire division headquarters was surrounded by the Imperial Expeditionary Force. They were forced into a desperate situation, and the 7th Division had no choice but to desperately fight back. The 7th Division, which had suffered countless casualties, made a name for itself and gained the reputation of being the Iron 7th Division. How many people had died in the 3 Imperial regiments because of their once fleeting cowardice? The media and public who did not know the inside story only knew that the division had bravely killed the enemy, and thus promoted them to the position of the Iron 7th Division. How could the big shots in the military who knew the inside story be satisfied? From then on, the glory of the Iron 7th Division was purposely forgotten. Du Shaoqing's father was once a staff officer of the Iron 7th Division. He participated in this cruel defensive battle and was one of the rare few who survived. However, a few years after Du Shaoqing was born, this officer, who was filled with endless guilt and fear, finally died of depression. Today, The truly reborn Iron 7th Division once again came to this planet that had brought them endless glory and humiliation. They were about to welcome a brand new military history. Du Shaoqing quietly looked at the undulating mountains of the planet and said slowly, "This is the first battle since the Iron 7th Division officially returned to the front lines after decades. This battle must be won." His sunglasses reflected the blue sky of planet 5460 and the yellow mountains. It was a magnificent sight. The highly anticipated concert of the Federation officially began. Whether it was the Capitol Ring, the Westwoods, or even the middle-aged man in the Empire's Tianjing building, everyone sat in their own comfortable seats and began to enjoy the concert either excitedly or silently. I lightly jumped into the river of love in front of me. The passers-by beside you can't compare to the gift box in your hand. Within a radius of 500 kilometers around the military camp in the southern hemisphere, 3 layers of defense were arranged. Countless military aircraft were on standby, and countless mechas were undergoing their final self-checks. The fleet in space was watching this solemnly. However, the purple-haired girl standing on the stage did not know any of this. She just hugged a large microphone, tilted her head slightly, and stood on the graceful stage shrouded in blue light. Facing the darkness below, she hummed softly as if she was murmuring, "I'm sorry. I say, dear, the passers-by beside you wish you a happy new year." The nation's young lady, Jian Shui, walked out of the clouds like a little fairy who had just come of age. Her purple hair was combed smoothly with a unique bow. She was as pure and cute as ever. However, her lips were painted bright red today. The red on her lips wasn't like blood, but like the smear of cinnabar on a white silk cloth. It was breathtaking and made the girl's pure face have a hint of the charm of an opera. The song ended. Other than the bright stage, the surroundings were silent. Other than darkness, there was only darkness. Even the sound of the audience's breathing couldn't be heard. Jian Shui stood on the stage alone and felt the loneliness that belonged only to her. She tilted her head in confusion and thought for a while. Then, she smiled sweetly towards the audience and said, "You can applaud now." As if they had received an order, the dark silence below the stage instantly collapsed. Applause and excited cheers instantly broke through the night of 5,460 people. This was the military camp. No matter how excited the Federation soldiers were in front of their dream idol, they still subconsciously maintained the cold silence of a mountain before they woke up from their daze. However, once they started to clap and express their excitement, the originally quiet and dark concert suddenly became a carnival scene. Amidst the thunderous applause, the director turned on the lights that had been deliberately suppressed for a few minutes. Countless beams of light began to madly sweep across the mountainous military camp. This was a rare scene of a simple concert in the Federation, but it was definitely the most enthusiastic and dazzling stage. The group of dancers wearing sky-blue miniskirts walked onto the stage. Under the dazzling lights, Jian Shui removed the cute butterfly clip and combed the short purple hair on her head into a clump of extremely vigorous wild grass. She stuck out her tongue and walked to the front of the stage in her pretty leather boots. The music started. Jian Shui looked at the densely packed soldiers below the stage and forced a serious smile. However, she didn't say anything. She just held the big microphone with both hands and lightly lowered her eyelashes. Like a quiet girl in an oil painting, she softly and attentively began to sing. "When I was 12 years old, I became the poor orphan that you all liked very much. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shui, that little girl with no parents. When I was 14 years old, in your eyes, I began to enter the military academy to study. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shui, the purple-haired girl destined to board the warship. When I was 16 years old, I received a very thin bracelet. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shui, but you don't know what it means to me. On the first day of the 66th year of the constitutional era, I held my first concert. I was very nervous. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shui, but you don't know what kind of bloody rain rained down in the underground parking lot that day. On the 67th year of the constitutional era, I went to the mountainous 4 states, wanting to do my best. Unfortunately, you only know me as Jian Shui, but you don't know how powerless I was in the ashes that day. I am the national girl, Jian XX. I am the national girl, Gen XX. When I smile, I'm not used to looking back. I'm not gentle. I just want to use my naturally cute smiling face to walk quietly with you, because I'm just an ordinary girl, Gen XX. Fireworks flew and the concert reached its climax. Shula looked at the national girl on the stage with tears in his eyes. However, he didn't know that far away, countless missiles rose into the air, just like the fireworks that filled the sky behind the stage. Chapter 404. The reason why I can't not read it is because it's very long and tiring, and it doesn't cost me any money. Wouldn't you be losing out if you don't read it? Here's the main text. Unavoidably, I, Tomcat, lazy cat, will recall the past, report the present, look forward to the future, and open my account book. After all, the year is almost over, and it's about to enter an even number of years. First, I'm terrified. Don't laugh in a hurry. It's not because I'm terrified of receiving your love. It's because in the blink of an eye, it's already 2001. It's making a middle-aged man like me panic. I'm turning 33. How time flies. When I wrote a nonsense serial in 2001, there was a line in it, Hong Kong only returned yesterday, so how is it that in the blink of an eye, we're crossing the century? Back then, I thought that the speed of 3 years in the blink of an eye was terrifying, but now, I realize that 10 years in the blink of an eye is the true tragedy. When one is about to die, one's words are true. I'm still a long way from death, but the pressure makes me want to do something. I want to write a story, and I'm writing one now. I want to make a movie, and that's nonsense. Even something like a script makes me dizzy, and I can't appreciate its beauty. I want to marry a wife, and I'm about to marry one. Yes, this is a very long story. In a few days, I'll write a short story to commemorate my long-lost single life. Speaking of which, from 2004 onwards, many reading comrades thought I was married, but in fact, I wasn't. I was just booked. Digression, back to the topic. How can I not be terrified? Shu Sanjuo said to do meaningful things, and meaningful things are to live well. Then what does it mean to live well? Then he said he was doing something meaningful, which made it a tongue twister. From my point of view, to do meaningful things, you have to make living well concrete. For example, what you do for a living, what kind of happiness and satisfaction you get after living well. This is very simple. It's the sigh I've repeated countless times to everyone. Doing what you like and earning money is happiness. The second is happiness. When I started writing this year-end speech, I was worried that there wouldn't be anything to write. Of course, when I saw the long paragraph of nonsense at the beginning, I realized that I had underestimated my nagging and long-winded abilities. The reason for this worry is that I always feel that when I look back on the year, there has to be some ups and downs in this year's life. Just like what Gidge Pig said to Ying Xiu a long time ago. Or was it Zi Yuan who said it? I forgot. It was probably because when Russian did not like ping ping, something like that. A plot without highs and lows was not a good plot. A year without highs and lows was a difficult year to write a summary. The celebration ended at the beginning of the year, and he felt very happy. Now that I've started a podcast, I feel very happy. Moreover, the more I write, the happier I feel. Before this, I had already thought that this topic would definitely not be pleasing. Mecha, but in the end, there weren't many mecha fights in a million words. If it was Interstellar, I would definitely not admit it. I don't have the ability to do architecture. If it was sci-fi, you can just kill me. I only admit that spy is a foreign land, but in fact, your divine eyes have already discovered it. What I want to write is just a story, but I can't find where to put the background, so I can only put it in a completely different world, but in essence, it is exactly the same world. For this kind of irrelevant topic, I brace myself and start writing because I really like it, and I'm sure that I can fully immerse myself in it, but I've already prepared myself mentally. In the end, the response is still sloppy. There are more than 80,000 views, and it's still slowly increasing. You have to know that during the same period of the year, there probably wasn't much more. Excluding the selectivity of the topic, I find that I'm okay. It's still that old saying that isn't actually yard. I really have a long life. Although the number of friends reading this story is increasing slowly, it looks like it will also last. This brings me back to the first sigh. I'm really prepared to do this for the rest of my life, so I have to write every story full of love. I've always thought that if you're determined to do something for the rest of your life, then that's the attitude of a career. I've raised myself up again, and I'm starting to walk with a clatter. I'm an easily satisfied person. It's because of this happiness that it's hard to write a summary. My family, growth, and life since I was young were all this happy and sunny. It was a complete mess. Fate was made in heaven. Year after year, I can't find any bumps in my life. I forgot to mention that life in May in Qing was also very happy. This is the third summary, the change of life. Living in Qing, there are many things to do and worry about. In the past, I've mentioned this many times in my nonsense. Some of my reading friends are tired of it and think I'm being pretentious. I won't talk about it here. I just feel that when one reaches middle age, it's indeed easy to get tired. Two pairs of readers got to know each other through reading my books, and they fell in love. It's said that they're preparing to get married. This is very good. Perhaps there are other readers who have the same story, but I don't know. I'm just thinking that you can and should get married. That way, my book of achievements will forever be filled with glory. Fourth, this story. This is a good story, but there's a problem with my ability. I'm not being modest here. Everyone knows that I'm not a modest person, so I can't necessarily write it well. However, I will adhere to one principle, which is to evaluate myself. What I write every day must be worthy of the subscription price you pay. When I first started to write about Qing Union, I only knew how to clear water and not fill in the blanks. Later, I realized that this was nonsense. Even if you don't want to fill in the blanks, there will still be times when you can't write and need to update. Intentionally or unintentionally, you'll still fill in the blanks. It's just that. I firmly believe that the words I fill in, which describe feelings and emotions, although pure, can be sold for a little money. This brings me to another point. I'm not being modest. Recently, I've been feeling quite proud, especially in December. Other than going to Baotu halfway through, I've been messing around the rest of the time. In fact, this messing around started on the 23rd of last month. Such an intensive 3 updates a day is something that a lazy person like me has never thought of before. But what's really proud is that during the 3 updates a day, I actually didn't fill in the blanks at all. I didn't even fill in the blanks. I actually wrote better than before. This was confirmed in the emotional greetings sent by Comrade Sheue, a female junior high school classmate of mine, and a few friends. If there's a problem with my self-perception, I think there shouldn't be too much of a problem with these guys' feelings. Does this mean that I really have potential to be tapped? I'm still young and haven't withered. Sixth point, I finally started to report the accounts. Since July, I've been grateful for everyone's support and love. I promised everyone that there won't be any irresistible situation, and I'll never update again. Yu Chun Seong jumped up victoriously and screamed, "I did it! I did it!" This is a very good attitude. I didn't write much. I'm indeed a lazy person, so I can only compare with myself. Fortunately, I've done what I promised you. That's enough. Speaking of this, I really want to say that I often spell in the group. I really admire the Tang family's third young master. It's not his speed, but his endurance. He's a guy with a professional spirit. I really want to learn from him. December's accounts have also been cleared. There's about 10 or so days of 3 updates. That's it. Now, I'll talk about the plan for next month and next year. Pay attention to it. 7th point, looking forward to the future. To be honest, I definitely didn't write as much in January as I did this month. I'll be very busy until March, and again in May. As for whether I'll be busy in between, sorry, I really don't know. I promise to keep updating. I promise that when I have time, I'll write more and write more seriously. Then, this year, I'll give you the story of the spy so that you can pass the time, and also pass some time. From now on, the first 7 days will be double the monthly votes. I can only do what I said before. I don't dare to promise to explode, because the invincible state won't last forever. I'm not tired, But I'm not tired either. I just need to rest. But I still need to solicit monthly votes. This is also a very important part of the plan. Everyone knows what kind of person I am. I've been performing well recently. I'm very confident that I can squeeze everything out of everyone. Back to the fifth point, I'm not modest. Many people laugh and call me narcissistic, but you and I are both wrong. I don't have low self-esteem, but my mood is easily affected. It's easy for me to think that I'm a scumbag after introspection, so I need to constantly encourage myself to maintain some kind of confidence and drive. So I really need your encouragement. Recommendation votes are good. Subscriptions are even better. Monthly votes are the best. Yes, the purpose of this year's summary is to encourage myself, and I hope that the comrades reading this story will also encourage themselves. I discovered that in order to live a good life in this society that isn't absolutely perfect, this technique is extremely useful. What kind of person am I? I'm a great and hard-working fat man. Seeing that this annual summary is close to 3,000 words, sincere and full of literary talent, how can I not vote for the monthly votes? The first part of the summary was written very smoothly, but the last part about soliciting votes wasn't. Actually, the last part of the solicitation was just because I was a little unconvinced. I don't believe that soliciting votes has to be hot-blooded enough and have to be updated enough. I just haven't updated enough. I probably won't be hot-blooded for the rest of my life, but I'll pull a lot of monthly votes to see. TSK, I'm that kind of person who doesn't walk the normal path. Woo-ha, I wish everyone a happy new year, healthy parents, and a happy life. I definitely don't have the energy to write more New Year's greetings. Chapter 405. I'm Jen, as in simple so-and-so. Shula stood in the shadows at the side of the stage, vigilantly watching his surroundings while listening to the 7 groups of reports from his headphones. His eyes were fixed on the graceful and charming girl on the stage, and his mood was gently swaying along with the lyrics that came out of her red lips. The simple so-and-so referred to Jen, or Jen Shui-er. The simple lyrics were written by her personally. Although it seemed a little long and complicated, everyone knew that those lyrics were talking about her life, the bizarre 19 years of life of a national idol. Especially for Shula, whether it was the assassination in Linhai or the terrorist attack on the concert in Huanshan, 4 states, even if he was not directly involved, he was deeply involved in these things, so he felt it more deeply. Jen Shueya sang this song on the stage for the first time. Shula looked at her quietly, thinking about the years that had passed. Only then did he realize that a girl's voice could be so low and fluctuating, and in the end, there was a trace of honesty and stubbornness. Thinking silently, the music gradually faded, the lights dimmed, and several military singers went on stage to perform. After the last break, Shula plugged in his headphones, hurriedly walked backstage to the electric downstairs, and held Jen Shueya's hand as they walked to the dressing room. The backstage of the concert was like a war. Half a minute later, Jen Shueya came out of the changing room. Shula, the only male in the room, couldn't help but stiffen slightly. His mouth was half open, and he was almost unable to speak because of that beautiful light. The last 3 songs of the concert were dynamic dance songs. Jen Shueya was wearing a very cool costume, unprecedentedly cool. The girl's purple hair was combed as smooth as a ray of light, and then tied up with a thin red ribbon, very eye-catching. The most important thing was that she was only wearing a very tight strapless dress with a white broadband belt around her waist. Her beautiful shoulders were exposed, and the close-fitting cut of the dress highlighted the girl's curves. And because of the low-cut design, one could even see the charming shadow between the 2 soft lumps of flesh. Jen Shueya was also very not used to this costume. With a trace of shyness, she covered her chest with her right hand, stuck out her tongue and said, "It's the first time I've dressed like this." With this small movement, the girl's playful and youthful sexiness gushed out of her body. Shula was a little embarrassed and lowered his head, only to find that the soft and tight red skirt was surprisingly short, revealing her slender legs. Shula was silent, thinking that if she went on stage and danced like this, wouldn't the soldiers see everything? Jen Shueya had always appeared in public with a healthy, fresh, and cute image. Now that Shula knew her family background, He naturally knew that this national girl didn't need to show her beautiful body, and probably no one would dare ask her to do so. It's hard to imagine what those soldiers will do when they return to camp tonight. Maybe it was because of the contrast between the noisy backstage and the quiet here, or maybe it was because the girl in front of him was charming and sexy enough to turn everyone upside down, which made Shula a little awkward. He actually said what was in his mind. He just didn't say that if the girl went on stage like this and exposed her body freely, it would definitely make countless people fantasize. This costume was not prepared by the performance team in advance, but by Jen Shueya after they went to the hospital and the cemetery that day. The girl bravely put down her right hand that was covering her body. Her cheeks were a little hot, and she opened her big eyes and said to Shula, "For the Federation, they stayed on this faraway planet for 2 years. You know, some of them are younger than me, maybe they haven't been in love before, they will die." Jen Shueya took a deep breath, and her short red skirt fluttered gently. She narrowed her eyes and said cutely, "If that's the case, isn't it good to make them happy?" This beautiful and moving national girl was undoubtedly the most lustful object in the Federation. Wearing the poster of the warship's military officer uniform, who knew how many otakus and uncles would accompany her in the middle of the night when they were lonely. Not to mention, she was dressed so charmingly today, just like a little fairy. In fact, Shula was also one of these people, so right now his face was a little hot. Shula said to make them fantasize, and Jen Shueya said with her big eyes, "For the Federation, they stayed on this planet for 2 years, maybe they will die. These young people probably haven't even been in love before, so what's there to be afraid of? I don't even care if they lick me." Shula blushed, thinking that she seemed to have done it before. In the strong rhythm of the dance music, accompanied by many dance groups, Jen Shueya appeared in the center of the stage in an unprecedentedly cool outfit. She held the standing microphone tightly with both hands, and her eyes were as clear as autumn water. She looked at the night sky and sang, and then she began to gently twist her body to the rhythm. Her movements were very smooth and seductive, but it had the unique innocence of a young girl. Regardless of whether it was her moving eyebrows or the slight movement of her waist, she did not deliberately reveal a trace of seductive gaze or body language. However, the young girl's pitilessly beautiful and inviolable face, coupled with this skin-tight short skirt that could kill eyeballs, the tens of thousands of Federation soldiers on the stage were first stunned, and then they were silent, and then a loud echo suddenly broke out. In the previous concert, most of the applause and cheers were heard, but now it turned into excited whistles. Shula nervously watched her on the stage. That red miniskirt was made of extremely thin material, and it was extremely tight-fitting, making the girl's tight and enchanting legs look extremely seductive. The designer was not satisfied, and actually made a slit on both sides of the miniskirt. As the girl gently twisted, the dazzling spring scenery inside the miniskirt was faintly discernible. The whistles under the stage became crazier and crazier. The members of Group 7, who were responsible for the security work, were dumbfounded. The people of the performance team and the broadcasting team looked at the national girl on the stage who they had never known before and were completely shocked. Shula's mouth was dry. He really wanted to take off his black formal suit, rush to the stage, and tie it around her waist. However, what she said before had touched him. Just listening to the crazy reaction of the soldiers under the stage, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Was this to rally the soldiers' hearts or to shake the soldiers' hearts? The youthful and playful little sex appeal on the stage was played to the extreme in the last song. When Jen Shueya, who changed into a dark Federation female officer uniform, appeared on the stage again, the little sex appeal had completely become a divine artifact that catalyzed male hormones. Everyone in the Federation saw her appear on the screen in this battleship commander uniform when she was 14 years old. This represented the collective memory of a generation. Today, the short skirt of the captain's military uniform was cut to its shortest length, and the top 2 buttons were undone. Only a military officer's scarf was casually draped over her fair skin. Her slightly messy purple hair was stuck to her moving cheeks because of the fragrant perspiration that seeped out from her perspiration. Still inexperienced, still shy, Jen Shueya forced herself to calmly release all the charm of a female captain. It turned out that this was the final climax of the concert. Shula stared at this scene in a daze. He didn't notice that the thousands of fireworks behind the concert were once again lit up, and the pillars of light that created the crazy atmosphere began to sweep again. Countless fireworks exploded on the strategic boundary line between the north and south of Planet 5460. The electric control network on the front line of the Federation had been monitoring the missile base of the Empire, but the first to launch an attack in the dark was not the missile force of the Empire, but the 17 Empire armored regiments with the momentum of tigers and wolves. Armored vehicles and self-propelled heavy cannons poured ammunition without any regard for the cost. The dense and terrifying roar was absolutely not one after another, because there was absolutely no moment of interruption in the middle. The front line, which had been quiet for a long time, was like a hurricane. Once it landed, it began to show its terrifying power. On the boundary line between the north and south that stretched for 3,000 kilometers, countless clouds of smoke rose into the night sky. Before they could disperse, they were shattered by the second wave of attacks. The loud explosions and blinding flashes were like fireworks in a concert, illuminating the entire sky. The high-speed Empire armored regiments and the even faster mecha squads shot out a soul-devouring and life-reaping rain of bullets from their cannons, madly sweeping the Federation's defense line. It was just that the light beams couldn't kill people, but the rain of bullets from the Imperial Expeditionary Force continued to destroy the Federation's defense line, reaping the lives of the Federation's soldiers. At the end of the 68th year of the constitutional calendar, Gen Shueya held a concert on Planet 5460 called Victory. The Imperial Expeditionary Force suddenly launched an all-out attack, charging towards the south with an indomitable momentum and terrifying firepower. It was as if they turned into 17 unstoppable sharp knives, stabbing straight towards the southern hemisphere. This planet, which hadn't had a large-scale war for a long time, finally began to tremble. The attack of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was like a hurricane. The moment it landed, it began to show its powerful destructive power without any hesitation. The Third War between the Federation and the Empire officially began because of a concert. The location of the Victory concert was in the Southern Hemisphere Federation's headquarters, which was still a long distance away from the location where the Imperial Expeditionary Force launched their attack. However, as soon as the concert ended, an ear-piercing air defense siren filled the sky. The soldiers, who were still immersed in the impact of Gen Shueya's uniform, suddenly had a serious expression on their faces. They woke up from their crazy emotions and quickly began to return to the camp, preparing for battle. The Federation's television station immediately cut off the broadcast signal, and Gen Shueya, who had just walked off the stage, was surrounded by 7 groups of armed personnel, beginning to prepare to evacuate. Unlike the soldiers, most of the people in this team were civilians. Hearing the ear-piercing siren, they were naturally terrified. An officer quickly arranged the evacuation matters while comforting everyone. The first wave of medium-range missiles launched by the Empire has been intercepted by the Weigwa system. The military fleet has been dispatched. Please don't panic. Lieutenant Colonel Shu Le. A major general walked over with a serious face, handed over an electronic document, and said, "This is the secret mission given to you by the Ministry of National Defense." Shu Le's heart sank slightly. He knew that things had finally come. Chapter 406. Shu Le looked at the top-secret military electronic order and narrowed his eyes. All the questions he had after receiving the mission from the headquarters of Whitewater Company a few months ago were partially answered by this document. Since the Victory concert was a small part of this large-scale military operation, it made sense for him and Group 7 to be in charge of security. Therefore, he didn't ask any boring questions like whether or not he could accept the mission. Instead, he asked the Major General, "We only need to send Gen Shueya to the warship, and the mission is considered over." The Federation's Major General couldn't be young. A Major General under 40 like Du Shaoqing was extremely rare. The Major General in front of him was around 50 years old. His expression was cold, and he wasn't very polite to Shu Le. He said in a deep voice, "What you need to do now is to execute, not ask. The headquarters will send a reinforced battalion to escort you to Zhejiu Airport. You need to leave immediately." Shu Le nodded silently and looked around. Although the headquarters couldn't hear the explosions at the front line, They could faintly smell the smoke and feel the pressure of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's large-scale attack. The members of Group 7 were already prepared to depart. Jian Shuai's team was also waiting to depart. In this tense moment, everyone's movements seemed to be countless times faster than usual. After all, if they stayed here any longer, no one knew if a missile would fall on their heads in the next second. The general said in a deep voice, "Let's go. I will personally accompany you." Shula knew Jian Shuai's identity, so he was not surprised by the Major General's words. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the figures around him in the dark. After confirming that the military had sent an entire mechanical division to protect them, he was slightly relieved. He turned around and held Jian Shuai's hand, and quickly walked to the black car. After getting into the car, he turned on the car's radar and main control system as fast as he could. At the same time, he put on his sunglasses and said in his mind, "Old man, watch the road for me." After getting in touch with the Federal Central Computer, Shula's mood became calmer. He didn't see the impending crisis as terrifying. Accompanied by pungent exhaust fumes, a fleet of military vehicles using compound power roared out of the base camp in the dark night and quickly advanced toward the Zechou spaceport in the southwest direction. A light battleship of the Federation was already ready to take off there, waiting to escort Jian Shuai and her team away from this terrifying planet that was already covered in a sea of fire and craggy stars. Shula controlled the steering wheel and drove the black car, leading his subordinate's motorcade. Under the protection of an entire battalion, they quickly advanced along the road. The temperature in the car had not immediately risen. Through the rear-view hologram, he looked at the girl curled up in the chair behind him. He neatly took off his black summer coat and threw it over, saying, "Wear this, don't catch a cold." Jian Shuai, who didn't have time to change her clothes, was still wearing the extremely short and cool captain's uniform. She didn't know if it was because of the cold, or because she was frightened, or because she still hadn't shaken off the mood of the concert, but her cheeks and ears were slightly red. She took the coat that had Shula's scent and silently put it on. The Imperial Expeditionary Forces attack was extremely fierce. The motorcade that was preparing to leave the planet was silent. Only the car's communication system rang from time to time with the command center's battle situation through the surface radio. Although the Imperial Army's speed was fast, under the resistance of the Federation's defense line, there was no way to stop the motorcade's advance. Through the old man, Shula had learned about the specifics of the battle earlier than anyone else in the convoy. He narrowed his eyes and silently looked at the military vehicles and the soldiers in the vehicles. He suddenly confirmed one thing: the target of the Empire's people should be the girl behind him. 30 kilometers away from Zechou Airport, there was a branch intersection. There was still silence in the black car, but Shula's face suddenly became extremely ugly. "What's wrong?" Jian Shuai had been carefully observing his expression and asked softly. Shula didn't answer. What answered Jian Shuai was the military's urgent notification in the system: Zechou Airport was raided by the Empire's fleet. The warships were seriously damaged and unable to take off. The landing platforms were completely destroyed. The battle damage is being assessed. In the dark night, the long motorcade stopped because of this unexpected situation. After 2 seconds of absolute silence, the Major General's cold and unquestionable voice came from the system. "According to the backup plan, the motorcade will turn to Luochou Airport." Most of the vehicles in the motorcade began to roar again, preparing to turn to the right side. However, the 7 military vehicles of the 7th Group were like silent stones, stopping on the right side of the road. They didn't have the intention to set off, because the black car had been silent and still. The Major General's angry voice sounded, "Lieutenant Colonel Shu, why don't you start immediately?" Shula held the steering wheel with both hands and narrowed his eyes. He looked at the determined but still young faces of the soldiers in the military vehicles in front of him and suddenly asked, "You know you are bait?" He didn't use the communication system, so this sentence was naturally directed to Jian Shuai. The girl tightened the clothes on her body as if she was a little afraid of the cold, and gently nodded. Shula was silent for a few seconds, pressed the earpiece in his ear and said to everyone, "I have a different opinion. The north-south boundary of planet 5460 was not the actual defense line. Between the defense positions of the Federation and the Empire, there was a buffer zone of about 120 kilometers wide. Therefore, when the Imperial Expeditionary Force fiercely advanced southward, the plains and hills in front of them did not suffer any powerful counterattacks at all. The Imperial Expeditionary Force with the black hibiscus flying military flag was like countless vicious beasts that had been hungry and thirsty for many years. They greedily and stubbornly pounced toward the water source. The mixed brigade of heavy armor and Moonwolf mecha turned into a black torrent, coldly but fanatically crushing line after line of defense. Accompanied by flames that soared into the sky and destruction all over the ground, they continued southward and continued southward. The Federal military had long been mentally prepared for the surprise attack of the Imperium's Expeditionary Army. However, they still did not expect that the Imperium's Expeditionary Army would actually launch an attack with all its members. This was definitely not a surprise attack, but a full-scale push that was close to staking everything on a single throw. He Zi was a company commander of the Xiaji Mountain defense position. Covered in dust, he pushed away the corpses of his orderlies in front of him and shouted into the communication device with a hoarse voice, "We need backup, we need backup." His orderlies died in the previous intensive airstrikes of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, and the microdrones of the Empire buzzing above his head were like troublesome locusts, constantly interfering with the Federal Army's wireless communication. The ground began to shake. He Zi's eyes were red as he looked at the countless armored vehicles that appeared on the hill. He helplessly put down the communication device in his hand, and then a fierce expression appeared on his face. He walked in front of the main cannon of the Gongzi and said to the cannoneer in a deep voice, "The mecha reinforcements are still 12 kilometers away, now it's up to you." From the company commander to the normal soldiers, looking at the Empire's armored vehicles and the ferocious black mechas that covered the hill, they already knew that they could not hold this line of defense, but they did not have the slightest bit of fear in their hearts. Even if they did not show it on their angry and twisted faces. The Gongzi's main cannon under the control of the company's cannoneer team shook violently, and beautiful cannon fire spewed out in a straight line. With a loud boom, one of the Empire's armored vehicles exploded into pieces under the unstoppable attack. Meanwhile, the armored vehicle behind it was also flipped over by this blast and fell heavily to the ground, almost smashing into a Moonwolf mecha with a ghostly figure, turning it into several tons of black dirt. Electronic interference, virtual bait, dazzling artillery fire, high-speed chariots, and strange mechas formed a thrilling scene in this valley. A black shadow flashed past, and the heavy Moonwolf mecha successfully avoided the cannon fire of the Federation's position and rushed up the hill. Company commander He Zi hugged the heavy carbine machine and shouted as he pulled the trigger on the mecha that was close to him. Beautiful bullets spewed out, and countless dull sounds of metal splashing rang out. However, it was all in vain. The Empire's Moonwolf mecha stepped heavily on his body, and at the same time, its right mechanical arm stabbed out with an alloy blade, ruthlessly stabbing into the weakest part of the Gongzi's main cannon. Under the heavy and huge mecha, the dull sound of heavy machinery still rang out, but after a short moment, it abruptly stopped. The Black Moonwolf mecha did not stop at all, and continued to move silently towards the south where there were still scattered resistance. Behind it, the Empire's armored soldiers surged past, leaving behind countless ruins and corpses all over the ground. Countless similar scenes played out in the valley and plains of this planet. The bloody and cruel war did not give people the time to reflect on its characteristics, and it had already brought death and defeat. The Federation's headquarters located in the base was busy, whether it was the lieutenant commander or the officers who were monitoring the movements of the Imperial Expeditionary Force through the electronic monitoring network, sending specific battlefield data to the various troops. Their expressions were exceptionally heavy and ugly. Since yesterday, the Federation's planetary headquarters had raised the defense level of the front line to the highest level. The highest-ranking officers had long guessed the Imperial Expeditionary Force's plan, but who would have thought that, under the premise of sufficient preparation, the Imperial Expeditionary Force would still advance so fiercely and so quickly? Are the people of the Empire crazy? They actually took out all of their assets. What is Amberry planning? The Federation's frontline commander, Lieutenant General Nelson, looked at the battle situation screen with a pale face, looking at the direction of the light that made him feel endless anger and humiliation, and he slammed the table heavily and shouted, "Inform Hong Yujing to immediately suppress the defense line behind Mount Xiaji. We must not let the enemy break through. Commander, the fleet must first ensure the safety of the spaceport," a staff officer reminded him worriedly. "I understand," Lieutenant General Nelson slowly calmed down and said, "but she will also understand." The federal military had always thought that the military leader of the Imperial Expeditionary Force in the north, old General Amberry, was only using this seemingly exaggerated full-scale attack to cover up a certain 1,000-mile surprise attack that they were determined to win. However, the reality was not so. The imperial general with deep military wisdom, after accepting the emperor's random order, actually found a way out of the impossible. He used a full-scale attack to cover up the 1,000-mile surprise attack, but wasn't he also using that surprise attack to cover up this decisive and terrifying full-scale attack? The Federal Army was very likely to fall into a situation where they could only focus on one thing and lose the other. Chapter 407. There was a line between the north and south of Planet 5460. This line originally only existed on military maps. Other than the fortifications hidden in the mountains and high-strength cement buildings, this line did not have any obvious markings. However, on this night, countless explosions, smoke clouds, and light clearly outlined this line. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's attack spread out on 2/3 of the circular line. Most of the attacks were concentrated in the night area. The dense flames rang out against the black background, appearing particularly dazzling. It was as if a god had tied a beautiful belt around the waist of this planet. The belt was decorated with sparkling rubies. Every shining ruby represented a violent explosion. The Federation's light feather fleet looked down on this scene from high above. They gracefully turned around in space, and the bow of the ship lowered, rushing down toward the belt that was filled with the will of death and blood. Countless missiles from both the north and south rose into the air. In the dark side of the planet, they drew out slender and mesmerizing rays of light. After the Federation's space fleet released the first batch of all-terrain fighters, they maintained a close distance. They did not dare to get too close to the atmosphere. The bow of the ship slowly adjusted. The inside of the 7 battleships began to emit a low but powerful roar. The light became dim. The huge energy output by the crystal multi-engine began to move toward the main cannon base according to the established channel. Main cannon ready to fire. Main cannon in position. Major General Hong Yujing looked at the light screen in front of her. She raised her right hand and said calmly, "Expand the O-shaped radius by 700%. The adjutant was stunned. "The lethality will be reduced by a lot. What we need is to help the ground forces get through this most difficult period." Major General Hong Yujing lowered her eyes and said, "The most important thing is the lethality area. Even if we blast the opponent's mecha into smoke, what effect will it have on the overall situation?" No one said anything else. In the current situation where crystal mines were scarce, the fleet that should have been the most terrifying force in the universe had an innate sorrow. The battleships had a huge power that the ground forces could not resist, but they did not have enough energy to support it and turn this power into victory. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 A fire. The countdown for the Federal Fleet's main cannon ended. The battleships floating in the dark side of the planet instantly entered some kind of absolute stillness. In addition to the palpitating silence in the universe, it was as if the entire world had stopped moving. More than 10 pillars of light shot out from the bases of the 7 warship. These beams of light looked so slender and delicate. They were silent, like flashlights shining into a lake. They gently passed through the planet's dark atmosphere and landed on the surface. The beam of light, which appeared to be thin in space, had expanded to an area of thousands of square meters when it landed on the ground. The sound finally rang out. Countless heavy-duty armored vehicles and moon wolf mechas from the Empire instantly exploded, overturned, and disintegrated into countless broken metal components, splashing in all directions under the punishment white light that descended from the sky. In order to expand the attack area, the Federal Fleet deliberately increased the area and reduced the degree of damage. If it was just to accurately hit a target, there would definitely be a lot of terrifying scenes of the Empire's heavy equipment being vaporized on planet 5460. Just like that time in the outskirts of the capital of Hushi State in the Donglin region, the beam of light that descended from the sky instantly turned the black M52 mecha controlled by Fengyu into a puff of green smoke. Because of the Federal Fleet's attack, the beautiful belt on the planet instantly bloomed with 10 light clusters. The ruber-shaped explosion clusters that represented the fierce ground attack were instantly overshadowed by these light pillars that descended from the sky. Report from the command center: the effect of the outer layer attack is very significant. The excited voices of the Federation staff officers sounded in the battleships. They waved their fists in the air and looked at the images on the ground transmitted from the satellite. They looked at the huge gaps that were forcefully blasted open by the battleships of the Imperial Expeditionary Force and the charred metal debris that sputtered around the gaps. They were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. The fierce attack of the 17 armored regiments of the Imperial Expeditionary Force was severely hindered under the precise attack of the Federation's space fleet. At that moment, the battle had already entered the second line of defense of the Federation. The Federal Army finally managed to block the continuous attacks of the Imperial Expeditionary Force with the help of powerful defensive firepower. Countless heavy armor units of the Empire were destroyed in the valleys and plains. Countless Moon Wolf mechas were hit by the electromagnetic missiles of the fighter jets. Their bodies flashed with a terrifying blue light as they were forced to fall. Then, the small teams of the Federation attacked the infantrymen. They used shoulder-fired rocket launchers to bombard the infantrymen non-stop. At the same time, the sturdy defense of the Federation also suffered a fierce attack that they had never experienced in the past 10 years. The fearless Imperial Expeditionary Force used all of their missiles and main cannons to continuously overturn the high-strength cement walls. Tens of thousands of tons of soil were continuously thrown into the air. The concentrated bullets hit any protruding objects on the surface of the ground, making horrible sounds. Who knew how many soldiers were turned into dust under this kind of firepower? The 3 mecha brigades will be here soon. The second wave of attack from the missile base is ready. Major General Hong Yujing frowned as she looked at the markings on the screen. She confirmed that the fleet had already helped the command center stabilize the situation. Although the attacks of the Empire were still as terrifying as ever, with the follow-up forces of the Federation catching up, they could at least hold the third line of defense. Right at that moment, the radar system of the light feather battleship suddenly emitted a sharp alarm. The quiet space was still quiet. There were no signs of the enemy. Why did the alarm sound? Major General Hong Yujing quickly walked back to her seat. Her expression was abnormally cold. She said to the entire fleet, "Electronic interference detected. Everyone retreat. Leave the atmosphere immediately and enter the distant space." This Federation captain's reaction was not slow. However, although the 7 battleships that had just fired their main cannons did not need to undergo emergency cooling, the reactivation of their multicrystal engines still required 10 seconds. However, right at the 7th second, in the space above the Federal fleet at an angle of 345 degrees, a wolf's head with a metallic luster appeared. The wolf's head seemed slow, but in reality, it was extremely fast. Only after leaving the ionization cloud's concealment could one see clearly that it was the head of a black battleship. Gradually, 1, 2, 3, a total of 17 Empire Night Wolf-class battleships appeared in the upper half of the Federal Fleet's airspace. They rapidly pressed down. The Expeditionary Army's only Empire Royal Fleet. Why would they appear here? Major General Hong Yujing's right hand was tightly clenched. She was extremely shocked, but her face did not reveal any emotion. She quickly and clearly issued a high-speed evacuation order to the entire fleet. Right now, the Federal Fleet was in near-Earth space. Facing the Empire's fleet tens of thousands of kilometers away, countless of them made effective evasive maneuvers. Although the offensive ability of the Empire's battleships was far inferior to the Federal Fleet's, Major General Hong Yujing knew that in front of these beasts of the Empire that even dared to engage in space collisions and perish together, if they did not immediately leave the near-Earth space and rely on the Federal Fleet's high speed to enter outer space, Her own fleet would very likely be dragged into the Empire's battleships and perish together. The overflow of the number 3 furnace's number 2 furnace is at 8%. Fleet, form the Kimura formation. Hurry! Urgent shouts rang out from the Federal fleet. In the silent space, the two fleets unexpectedly encountered each other, but neither launched an attack first. They only raised their speed to the maximum and began to chase after each other. The reason the Empire's fleet did not launch an attack was very simple. The crude main cannons of their battleships, in the large-scale space environment, even if they hit the Federation's battleships, would not immediately cause real damage to the Federation's super-thick alloy armor. The reason the Federal fleet did not launch an attack was that the energy quota of the battleships was seriously insufficient. They had to save the energy that was not used to maintain the operation of the battleships for the most critical moment. The Federal fleet had the advantage of speed, but the Empire's fleet that should never appear here had the advantage of numbers and positioning. The timing of the appearance of the Night Wolf fleet was especially perfect. The Federal fleet's main cannons had just been fired and were still in the near-Earth space. The silent chase was an extremely dangerous chase. If the Federal fleet was really closed in by the enemy, then they would certainly blossom into a cluster of fireworks above the planet. Break away from the Level 1 gravitational interference. The command and control system of the Light Feather class battleship issued a timely voice. The soldiers of the Federal fleet that had been silent and tense for 3 minutes all breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. They subconsciously wiped the cold sweat on their foreheads. As long as they left the near-Earth space, with the speed of the Empire's fleet, there was no way they could catch up with them. Continue to break away from the Level 2 gravitational interference. However, Major General Hong Yujing did not relax. Her eyes were as sharp as knives as she stared coldly at the light screen. Looking at the Night Wolf fleet of the Empire that was changing their formation, she knew that the enemy would definitely not let her go. The situation was still dangerous. 7 Empire's battleships have left. The deputy commander shouted in shock. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to die? General, I suggest that we immediately release the battleships and launch a sniper attack against the enemy. What are they trying to do? Major General Hong Yujing looked at the Empire's fleet that was changing their formation 100,000 kilometers away. Her heart was heavy. Suddenly, she said in a cold voice, inform the ground command that the Empire's fleet is heading towards Ziyiqiu spaceport. Hearing this, the Federation officers that were busy in the command hall froze at the same time. They turned around and looked at her in disbelief. Inform the ground command that our fleet has been forced to leave the near-Earth space and is in a state of entanglement with the enemy. We can't support the spaceport. Tell them to prepare to face the enemy. Major General Hong Yujing slowly lowered her head and said softly, or retreat. The head of the Empire's Night Wolf battleships was a wolf's head with a metallic luster. It definitely did not fit the design concept of space combat, but it was the nightmare of countless Federation battleships. This was because the Empire's people who were not afraid of death would often use this wolf's head to play the game of perishing together with the enemy. The commander of the Night Wolf fleet, Fu Ding, looked at the surface that was getting closer and closer. He said calmly, attack the spaceport, release the battleships, and open up a path for the mecha team. Our goal is to capture Jian Shueya alive for His Majesty. The Night Wolf fleet appeared like a ghost. They only used 2 changes of speed to successfully force the Federal fleet into outer space. It had to be said that this commander's commanding skills had already reached the realm of perfection. Normal tactics, just because of his perfect grasp of timing, brought the dawn of victory to the Empire. He rubbed his blonde curly hair and looked at the planet's night zone that was filled with flames. He smiled and said, my fleet is not here to be a guest. Chapter 408. There was no moon in Planet 5460. The side of the sky facing away from the star was only filled with stars. The night here was very quiet, as dark as ink. But tonight, the sound of explosions on the planet never stopped. The edge of the dark wilderness that stretched into the distance lit up from time to time. It looked like lightning, but in fact, it was countless advanced weapons releasing their energy, lighting up half of the sky. The same was true at Luocho Spaceport. The sound of explosions and light were even more intense. The Imperial Royal Fleet that quietly came to the rescue of Planet 5460 began to waste their energy from the edge of the atmosphere. One of the largest spaceports in the Federation had fallen into a sea of fire. The fleet named Night Wolves did not take advantage of the situation to attack Luocho Spaceport further away. Just like in the ancient wars of the Empire, the blonde commander firmly implemented the policy of encirclement. In addition to the bombardment of the main artillery, the attack on the spaceport relied more on the fighters released by the fleet. Hundreds of black all-terrain fighters could be faintly seen in the night. Like tiny black mosquitoes, they moved swiftly between the anti-air artillery and the rapidly sweeping illuminating lampposts on the Federation's ground. From time to time, a fighter would be tragically hit by a missile, dragging a long tail of light as it tragically plunged to the ground. However, even if they were hit, the fighter pilots of the Imperial fleet still incomparably valiantly controlled the fighter to fall toward the command center of Luocho Spaceport, using their own deaths to deal the final damage to the Federal Army. These Imperial pilots did not parachute. The Federal military on the ground was not surprised by this desperate attack. Because in their battlefield experience, the people of the Empire had always been this kind of lunatic who did not care about their lives. The fighter groups of the Federation had already taken to the air and launched an attack in just a few minutes. In the night sky in the southwest direction, the sharp sound of air turbulence and fireworks like explosions rang out from time to time. 30 kilometers away, the spaceport road was very quiet. The long convoy stopped silently on the side of the road. People watched the war and the tragic situation at the spaceport. No one was willing to speak, especially now that there seemed to be some kind of disagreement within the team. This is the backup plan of the Ministry of Defense. Your opinion is reserved. The Major General ran out of the black car and shouted angrily at Shula, "Hurry up. What are you still doing here?" Shula turned off the electronic map on the car central control system. He held the steering wheel with both hands and remained silent for a second. He turned around and said something to Jen Shueya. He then opened the car door and stood on the cement road. He said to the Major General, "If we're going to Luocho Airport, I don't think we need to go with so many people." The battle on the planet's surface had already broken out. Shula already knew what the Federal military wanted to do. Although he did not understand why the military was so sure that Jen Shueya was attractive to the Empire, he was sure that Jen Shueya was the bait, and he, Group 7, and the entire battalion of soldiers would encounter unprecedented danger on their way to Luocho Spaceport. He knew very well that his identity was a military officer that had to obey orders. However, he could not watch the entire mechanical division fall into the encirclement of the Imperial Expeditionary Force just to protect himself and Jen Shueya. He was still wearing the sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. No one knew that his left pupil was slightly narrowed at this moment. He was communicating with the old man. From the attack on Luocho Spaceport and the direction of the Imperial Expeditionary Forces attack, the Empire was very clear about Jen Shueya's location. The old man only used a very short amount of time to find out that the signal interruption station of the Federation TV station was probably hacked by the Empire's electronic forces. However, at this moment, countless miniature surveillance aircraft of the Empire covered the southern hemisphere sky like a flock of birds. In a short amount of time, the Federal military could not eliminate all of them. However, these troublesome little things designed by the Empire's scientists to break through the glory of the Charter, combined with the Empire's military satellites that were forcefully changing their orbits, could accurately find the target they were looking for. The Federation's electronic surveillance network in the southern hemisphere was only 40% complete. There was no way to completely block this fleeing convoy in this tense moment. We all know what the plan of the Ministry of National Defense is. In that case, I'll take Jen Shueya there. Shula took off his sunglasses and said to the general. Then he turned around and gave an order to Group 7's subordinates. Jiyu Shifeng, get ready to warm up. Jiyu Shifeng, who was an expert in data processing, paused for a moment. She put the KN light machine gun in front of her behind her back and quickly ran to the heavy multi-axle truck behind the black car. She jumped onto the truck and turned on the electronic valve. A low humming sound came from the truck. At the same time, the top of the truck began to move to the side. "What are you doing?" A trace of anger appeared in the eyes of the Major General. He moved closer to him and said hurriedly, "Who do you think you are? Without the protection of the mechanical division, do you think you can take Miss to Luo Chio safely? Are you out of your mind?" Hearing the word Miss, Shula was even more certain that this Major General must be a direct subordinate of the Feiqing faction. At this point, everyone was very clear about the dangers ahead and the real intention of the military to use them as bait. "I insist on my opinion." Shula took 2 steps back and opened the back door of the black car. He took Jian Shuya out and said in a low voice, "The military can ignore the lives of these hundreds of soldiers, but they can't just watch this happen. The most important thing is, I think that if I take Miss Jian Shuya away alone, I have a higher chance of success." At this moment, time was very urgent. The Major General's face was extremely ugly. He grabbed Shula's vest and said in a low voice, "Bullshit. Do you know how big of a risk the department took to come up with this plan? If Miss gets hurt, how will the entire Department of Defense answer to this? I personally brought the strongest battalion to escort you there, and I don't even have the slightest chance of success. How dare you say you have the slightest chance of success?" Shula was not blinded by personal heroism, but his engineer's logic told him that on this planet that was already filled with the flames of war, taking Jian Shuya away alone was the best choice. The MX mecha on the truck had already finished heating up. Under the protection of the glory of the Charter, he firmly believed that no matter how strong the Empire was, no matter how far-sighted their plans were, they would not be able to stop him. An MX mecha was naturally useless against the terrifying attacks of the Empire, but it was an unparalleled weapon when used to escape. "As a general, I order you to get in the car and leave immediately," the Major General reprimanded angrily. Shula allowed the Major to grab his shirt. He lowered his head to look at the time and said, "In the electronic secret order you showed me earlier, I am the one with the highest authority for this plan. The fact that the Department of Defense gave me this mecha means that the old man already guessed what I would choose." He took Jian Shuya's hand and said with certainty. He cared about the life and death of this battalion of soldiers, but the generals in the command center cared more about Jian Shuya's life and death. This did not mean that the Federation and the old man were cold-blooded, but it was the natural reaction of the people who commanded the war. The general's arm stiffened. "Do you think that you alone are stronger than an entire mecha division? Lieutenant Colonel Shula, wake up." Shula ignored him. He held Jian Shuya's hand and walked towards the heavy-duty truck. The young girl who was being held by Shula remained silent, obediently not saying a word. She let Shula handle everything, but there was a hint of curiosity and shock in her large eyes. "Bai Yulon, bring the box over." When they walked past the military vehicles of Team 7, Shula looked at the handsome man beside the car and said. Bai Yulon frowned and threw the cigarette butt in his hand onto the road. He had already vaguely guessed something, but he was not willing to let Shula take the risk alone. The entire Team 7 did not want this guy to be some stupid hero. Seeing Bai Yulon's hesitation, Shula glared at him angrily and said loudly, "Bring it over." The non-combatants were still in the vehicles, watching the fierce battle in the southwest direction with their bodies trembling. The Team 7 combatants and an entire battalion of soldiers had already gotten out of the vehicles. They looked at the young man and woman who were climbing onto the heavy-duty truck with complicated eyes. The general in charge of this plan looked at this scene with a gloomy face. It seemed that he had not decided whether to stop or not. The roof of the heavy-duty multi-axle truck had been opened. A black MX mech in a moving state was like a sleeping steel giant, waiting to be awakened by its master. Accompanied by a soft but incomparably familiar hydraulic sound, the cockpit door at the chest of the mech opened. Shula threw the black box inside and stepped on the protruding metal platform. He turned around and extended his right hand to the girl below. He asked, "You know very well that there are 2 paths. Returning to the command center is naturally safe. If we want to go to Luo Chio Airport, there are only the 2 of us. Without a doubt, this is a risk. Do you want to take the risk with me?" Jian Shuya raised her head and looked at Shula's slightly narrowed eyes. Suddenly, she found that the young man standing on the black mecha's originally ordinary face had become more attractive. Without hesitation, she reached out her soft little hand with a smile and placed it in Shula's hand. There was a flurry of gunfire. The signal relay vehicle of the Federation TV station was blasted into a pile of debris. Xiong Lingquan looked at his masterpiece with satisfaction. He lifted the heavy Dalen machine that was still spinning at high speed and turned back to salute the leader of the truck. Sitting in the cockpit of the mech, Shula completed the final self-check of the MX mech with a calm expression. Before he closed the hatch, he suddenly said to the young girl squeezed beside him, who was as obedient as a cat, "The people of the Empire want to capture you. They must be watching you from the sky right now. Aren't you going to say hello?" Jen Shueya widened her eyes and finally could not help but burst out laughing. She supported herself on his shoulder and stood up. Then, she waved her hand at the starry sky in the cockpit of the mecha. The alloy hatch closed. The multiple engines at the waist of the black MX mech instantly started up. The powerful output made the air begin to ripple. The soldiers in the cockpit all had different expressions, but they were all silent. They felt the heavy pressure from the heavy-duty multi-axle truck to the ground. They felt extremely nervous. With a muffled bang, the heavy-duty truck with an astonishing load was like a falling-apart building. Its tires burst and dust flew everywhere. It crashed heavily onto the hard surface of the road. Chapter 409. Let me first explain a little about the plot. The previous chapter's name wasn't originally this. The original chapter's name was Kula, but when I uploaded it, I suddenly remembered Sokai Noriko's song. The sentence that left the deepest impression on me was, "For you, I want to take risks." So I used that as the chapter's name. Back to Jen Shueya's concert. The first song I wrote for her was from Shu Jorying's album. I changed the birthday gift to a New Year gift because it was written on the 31st. The second song, Jen So-and-so, was obviously written on the spot after listening to Tan Weiwei's song that night. Lyrics aren't difficult to write. Although this song was poorly written, it was because I wrote it in one breath. I didn't change the lyrics at all. Tan was actually quite interesting, but when Weiwei sang old Chue's song, it felt wrong. When Yuan Weiren sang it, it was even more wrong. If a friend wants to ask me to write lyrics and get royalties, feel free to look for me. I'm actually the most confident when it comes to writing lyrics. When I listened to Do Wei more than 10 years ago, I was determined not to look at the lyrics. I thought it was very beautiful, but when I looked at the lyrics, I thought, it should be better, right? So I wrote a few songs at that time. I'm really confident in this aspect, but I never had the chance to show it. In my next book, I might write a lot of lyrics and then indicate the copyright. Can I satisfy my fascination with the literary circle? Finally, I'll start soliciting votes. It's said that I can only write in the middle of the night. It's true, but this isn't a good thing. I've made you wait for a long time. Recently, I've been really busy. Last month, there were more than 10 days before the third watch. Now, when the monthly votes are doubled, I can't come out. This is really sad, but everyone can understand. It's not that I don't want to write more votes, but I really don't have the time. The summary was wrong. I didn't write much, and the monthly votes did rise slowly. But Xiao So-and-so was still resentful of being left behind, overtaken, and overtaken. Chapter 410. In the distant night sky, dazzling flames flashed. More than 500 soldiers of the Federation sat on their respective armored vehicles, looking into the distance with a trace of admiration and worry, looking at a certain place where the black mecha had disappeared in the distance. The mechanical division aimed at the heavy truck with the howitzers and more powerful weapons. Because the truck suddenly collapsed and the target left at high speed, they naturally stopped firing. The white-haired Major General stood in the middle of the road with a complicated expression. After a difficult struggle, he finally didn't order his subordinates to use force to stop the reckless Shula. "Connect me to the command center. No, connect me to the Ministry of Defense." He quickly walked to the military vehicle and asked the adjutant to connect the military satellite phone. He roared angrily, "Tell Zhu Yingxing that Brat kidnapped the young miss. If anything happens to the young miss, I will hold him responsible." The men of Group 7 carried their heavy weapons and began to prepare to leave with heavy expressions. Bai Yulon's delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted together. She exchanged a look with Lan Xiaolong beside her, but in the end, they didn't say anything. Their mission this time was to protect Jian Shuya, and they had to protect Xu Le, but now, the two people they were supposed to protect had abandoned them. In the shortest amount of time, 30 kilometers northeast of Ziyiqiu Spaceport, what happened on the quiet road was transmitted to the 5460 Federation Command Center and the Federal Fleet in space. Major General Hong Yujing slowly took off her military cap and used her fingers to comb her hair. She wasn't very worried about the 7 Night Wolf battleships. The fleet under her command was about to leave the second gravitational range. At that time, no matter how fearless the Empire's battleships were, they wouldn't be able to threaten her fleet. The most important part of the plan this time seemed to have undergone some changes. In the Southern Hemisphere Command Base, Lieutenant General Nelson listened to the battle report with a serious expression. After a moment of silence, he said, "Help that mecha take care of the threat from the air. The problem on the ground can only be left to that young man. The remaining time of the electronic interference and the time it takes for the Federation to clean up those little things must be calculated immediately." In the circular base of the Imperium's Expedition Army in the Northern Hemisphere, inside the spacious underground command hall, more than 40 large light beams were displaying the images of countless cruel and heroic battles at night in the south. Without the help of near-orbit satellites in the Southern Hemisphere, the electronic surveillance of the Imperium's army mostly relied on the mini-unmanned electronically controlled aircraft that they called Little Things. Therefore, the images were often distorted and blurred. The Federation has already shot down 2 of the 3 orbit-changing satellites. After the Norman officer gave the order to the computer, he picked up the phone and shouted to the electronic troops in the distance, "No matter what the results of the calculation are, the electronic interference 32 degrees to the south, you must hold." He put down the phone and unfastened the top button of his military uniform in annoyance. This was because he knew very well that the electronic troops that sneaked along the valley to the demarcation line were actually taking a huge risk. The Federation would definitely choose them as the main target. No one knew how long the advantage in electronic warfare would last. The battle started in the middle of the night. The Imperial armies attacked the south with irresistible force. This was because the Imperial military headquarters went beyond the Federation's expectations. At the very beginning of the battle, they threw all their resources at the southern defensive position. The weapons and the soldiers' willpower that they had been accumulating for 10 years surged out in an instant, catching the Federation off guard. In the words of the Expeditionary Forces commander, Old General Ambley, in front of a righteous army, any conspiracy would be crushed into powder by the Empire's iron stream before it could ferment. However, when the Empire's armored torrent attacked the middle area between the 2nd and 3rd defensive line in the southern hemisphere, the advantage of the Federal Army's weapons began to gradually reveal itself. This was especially so when the Empire's powerful and precise counterattack was deployed. This made the Imperial officers in the base feel a little worried. After the initial defeat, the Federal Army was actually able to accept the fact so quickly and methodically strengthen their defense and even organize a counterattack. This only proved that they were a little scared by the violent offensive of the Imperial armies in the beginning. However, secretly, the Federal Army was already prepared. The only orbit-changing satellite that survived the Federation's attack sent back another critical image. The Norman officer's dark blue eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. He quickly walked to the round table in the middle of the hall and saluted to the old general. He quickly said, "The target has already headed to Luoqiu Airport. This is completely in line with the tactical deduction of the General Staff Headquarters." Old General Ambley held the scalding hot teacup with both hands and nodded tiredly. From the tone of this subordinate, he knew that there must be more to it. But the specific situation is a little different. The Federation's command center sent an entire mechanical battalion to escort the concert team, but they are still in the same place. The one that left this time is only a single mech. The Norman officer used his fastest speed to turn on the hologram system on the table and brought up the previous image. He said hesitantly. Old General Ambley raised his head and looked at the blurry satellite image on the hologram table in front of him. In the image, on the road, nearly 100 Federation's heavy armored vehicles were silent and motionless. However, a black mech on a heavy truck was moving. He could vaguely see the hatch opening. The Imperial Expeditionary Force's must-kill target, the beautiful Federation national girl, was looking down and waving to the sky. Old General Ambley's cloudy eyes gradually revealed a trace of coldness. Only now did he realize that the Federal Army might have used the celebrity as bait. If this speculation was true, what kind of misfortune would befall the Empire's army? Just like how he didn't understand His Majesty's order to hunt down the Federation national girl, he also didn't understand why the Federal military dared to use such a bait. In fact, even the commanders of the Federal Army didn't understand the mystery behind this. This was a battle to the death between the Empire and the Federal Army. It was also a battle between the Federation's military god and the Empire's emperor. When fishing, if the fish is big enough, strong enough, and fast enough, it can eat the bait and swim away. Old General Ambley put down the teacup beside the chair and stood up. He looked at the electronic map and the image on the table and said calmly. He knew that his subordinates standing beside him, like him, had guessed the intentions of their counterparts in the Federation, but he didn't decide to give up. Because this was His Majesty's will. Even if he knew that the Federation in the south had set up a trap, old General Ambley had no choice but to dive in head first. Not to mention, his troops had the ability and courage to do so. In order to not let us, the big fish, notice the problem, the fisherman was overconfident and cut the fishing line countless times thinner. If that's the case, let's eat the bait and cut the fishing line. I want to know, this pilot who dared to set foot on the road of escape alone, how arrogant is he, or is he a lunatic? The old general looked at the black mecha disappearing into the wilderness and smiled slightly. There was a hint of absolute confidence in his faint mocking tone. He ordered, begin the second phase of the plan. The staff officers beside him were hesitant because they knew very well what kind of terrible losses the second phase of the plan would bring to the Empire's expeditionary army. However, in front of His Majesty's will and the General's order, they had nothing to say. They could only accept. Closely monitor the line from Route 7 to Luorcho Spaceport. Even if there are Federation troops there, I want to know how many people they can send. Add the backup brigade. We must ensure that when Moonwolf passes through that area, the Federation headquarters will be terrified of the Empire's attack and won't dare to send any troops to support them. The task of the frontline troops is to suppress and lead. No matter how many people the Federation buried there, we can't let them increase the number of people. After confirming that this might be a trap, old General Ambley only responded with a few simple orders. He leaned on the table and quietly looked at the colored dots on the electronic map. After a long moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Don't worry. Tell Love that in order for his mecha brigade to complete the mission given by His Majesty, at least 20,000 brave Empire soldiers will die on this planet tonight. If he can't kill the target, he should know what to do." Hearing this, the officers of the Empire felt a chill in their hearts. However, when they thought of the super strength of the Moonwolf group and Captain Love, they calmed down a little. Old General Ambley was about to leave the command center when suddenly his white eyebrows trembled slightly. He turned around and said to the staff officer, "Check in the database. I feel that the black mecha from before is a little strange. It's the Federation's newest model, MX. One of the staff officers replied, "The model has been confirmed before, but there hasn't been more information, so the database can't provide the specific power and firepower parameters." Old General Ambley was silent for a moment. The slight discomfort in his heart grew stronger and stronger, but he didn't show it in front of his subordinates. He just waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, remember to ask Love to bring this MX back. This is a very important thing. Don't let that pilot self-destruct." The Imperial Expeditionary Army activated the second phase of the plan. The 17 armored regiments that were active in the southern hemisphere at night suddenly retracted their lines and gave up on the targets in front of them. They changed their attack routes and formed two arrowheads, charging towards two areas in the south. Although the 17 mecha divisions were extremely far away from each other, from their attack route, it was clear that they would arrive at the same area in the end. At the same time, the Imperial Expeditionary Force, which had been silently waiting behind the demarcation line, followed the scorched earth and pressed forward. At this point, except for the few troops left behind, the Maple Forest Alliance on planet 5460 had pushed all of their attack forces to the southern hemisphere. Chapter 4:11. The dense array of cannons spewed out dazzling light. Over 1,000 high-speed cannons whistled through the sky every second and blasted toward the Imperial Iron Stream. The entire Earth was shaking. Such a dense amount of cannons had not appeared in this part of the universe for more than a decade. Tonight, it was suddenly unleashed in the belly of the planet. It made people tremble uncontrollably. The heavy armored vehicle charging at the front was hit by a dozen cannons in succession and exploded with a boom. The Imperial mecha hiding behind the chariot charged valiantly forward like a phantom. However, the air all around them was filled with high-speed spinning armor-piercing shrapnel like a torrential downpour. Even the highly mobile Night Wolf mecha had no way of displaying its mobility in front of such terrifying defensive firepower. It only managed to hold out for 3 more seconds before it was reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Boom, 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 boom. In the following bombardment, the Night Wolf mecha was hit until sparks flew everywhere and its limbs were shattered. The empty hills were filled with sharp and terrifying screams. The Federation's defensive positions opened fire. The night sky was filled with fire and smoke, covering the sky and earth. Gradually, the smoke fell on the Imperial chariots and the corpses of the soldiers. However, before they could settle down, they were shaken up by even more violent explosions. However, in the thick smoke, the black hibiscus flag representing the Imperial royal family continued to flutter. Although the flag was already a bit old from the smoke, it still rolled in the wind. Facing the cannon fire, it coldly and silently moved forward. Forward. Another wave of group armor attacks. The Imperial army did not stop for a single step or breath. They completely ignored the chariot mecha that continuously turned into smoke and silently sent off their fallen comrades. Almost crazily, they charged toward the Federation's third line of defense. The situation on the battlefield was like a giant white wave in the dark sea. In the night of wild winds, it continuously slammed against the reefs of the coastline. The reefs looked incomparably sturdy, but the giant wave had no intention of retreating at all. It did not care that it would be smashed into pieces. The wave behind followed closely behind the wave, vowing to smash those black reefs into painful powder. On the annular belt of planet 5460, there were more than a dozen scenes like this. The 17 armored regiments of the Imperial Expeditionary Force's Maple Forest Brigade were like 17 devils carrying black spears as they tried to pierce through the thickest defense line of the Federation. In a large-scale battle on the surface of a planet, the 17 armor clans seemed to be fighting from thousands of miles away, but in reality, they were all vaguely connected. The main direction of the Imperial armies' attack was quietly moving in 2 different directions amidst the seemingly crazy and unreasonable attacks. The 17 black spears were about to become 2 giant arrows that could not be blocked. The Federation's defensive line, which had just stabilized, began to wobble in the face of this wave of attacks. Although the damage to the fleet in the sky was not great, they had to take off and land wave after wave to replenish their energy and ammunition. In the permanent fortifications on the ground, 23% of the main cannons had already been declared useless due to overuse. Even the high-density cannons, which had cost a lot of money, were about to enter a stage of energy instability because they had to continuously defend against the Imperial iron flow. There were even a few locations where the high-density cannons had already started to sound alarms. The officers of the Federation looked at the reckless Imperial iron flow on the holographic screen in anger and disbelief. Apart from being shocked, they were also endlessly puzzled. Why would the Imperial military attack at all costs? Under the attack of the Federation's 3-dimensional defense system, they had to pay an incomparably terrible price for every step they took, but they were still attacking. Attacking without stopping. This kind of crazy attack was bound to bring about serious losses. Although the Federal Central Computer had not yet produced an evaluation report of the Imperial military's losses, just by looking at it, the frontline commander could confirm that at least 1/6 of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade's combat strength had been lost in an instant just like that. With the Federation's powerful defense system and advanced firepower arrangement, according to the current speed of the Maple Forest Brigade's loss, even if they were allowed to fight their way to the headquarters base, how many of them would be able to survive? The target of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade was the Federation's Planetary War Zone headquarters. They shouted "Long live His Majesty" and charged coldly toward death. In the end, they fell one after another and were buried in this faraway foreign land that was countless light-years away from their homeland. The soldiers of the Empire would not equate stupidity with heroism. However, in order to complete His Majesty's mission, in order to fulfill the strategic objectives of the headquarters, from the most basic squad to the heavy-duty Moon Wolf mechas that attracted the attention of countless people, no one took a step back. In fact, they even thought for a second longer. If the four-layered three-dimensional defense system that the Federal military had spent many years building was like a giant steel curtain that encompassed everything from the black grassland to the vast sky in the southern hemisphere, then the crazy and reckless group attack of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade was like two fists at this moment, an indestructible cannon fire giant fist. Looking at the density of the cannon fire in the wilderness and the firm determination of the Imperial Iron Stream charge, there was no doubt that old General Ambley in the Northern Hemisphere base would rather let these two fists completely destroy him in order to tear a hole in this steel curtain. The Maple Forest Brigade, who had been attacking from all directions, had already retracted their fingers into fists. The 17 armored regiments had become alloy fists with enormous strength. They fiercely smashed toward the Federation's defensive position, wanting to smash through the opponent and then smash toward the opponent's vital point. The 10 armored regiments were the right fist of the Imperial Maple Forest Brigade. They sharply and wildly smashed toward the Federation's headquarters in the northeast of the planet's night zone. The remaining 7 regiments attacked the southwest, encircling and attacking. They fiercely smashed their fists toward the most important military base in the southern hemisphere. For the Federal Army, regardless of whether it was the headquarters or the military base, they were both absolutely important places that they had to defend. The headquarters was the brain of the army, while the military base was the heart of the Federal Army, providing them with an unending supply of nourishment. No matter what the initial design of the Federal military was, and no matter whether or not Lieutenant General Narsun could see through the military plan of the old general of the Imperium, the Federation had to adjust its defense strategy immediately in the face of the two violent, unreasonable, blood-stained fists that still contained terrifying power. It was necessary for the Federation to defend itself immediately and block the enemy's incessant attacks. The Federation's soldiers stepped on the corpses of their comrades. Countless pairs of scarlet eyes stared and loudly shouted. In the end, they didn't let the Empire's people break through in an instant. The steel curtain in the southern hemisphere, under the bitter resistance of the Federal Army, barely held on. However, near the equator, this steel curtain had already begun to distort and deform, revealing its weakest areas. At this moment, the Maple Forest Alliance's fully mechanized brigade, which was the last to enter the battlefield, fiercely charged towards the deformed steel curtain. The 17 armored divisions in charge of the fierce frontal assault were already bloody fists. The 30,000 Imperial Brigade was like a wolf's mouth. At this moment, they had already bared their ferocious white fangs and were about to take a bite. The direction of the wolf fang was the flat mountainous area between Ancho Airport and Luocho Airport. Old General Ambley held his teacup and calmly looked at the military intelligence report on the electronic map. After confirming that the Wolf Fang Brigade had entered the designated area, he took a deep breath. A trace of blood appeared on his slightly tired face. What should be done had been done. The rest was up to fate. The old general slightly bent his body and waved his hand to refuse the service officer to follow him. He silently walked out of the command hall, took the elevator, and came to the highest point of the circular base. Facing the cold wind of the northern hemisphere, he looked at the faint light of the southern hemisphere on the other side of the forest. The people of the Southern Federation definitely didn't expect him to be this crazy. You want to fish, but I'm going to break your fishing rod. Old General Ambley silently thought, but he knew that in the West Woods, in this Federation land, even if they could achieve some success tonight, as long as the Empire couldn't break through the Night Scorpion Nebula and Gary Corridor, the Expeditionary Army's only path back was death. A few months ago, when the Federation began to send more troops, the old general had already guessed what the Federal military, or rather the Federation's military god, was going to do. The Federation was going to start a war. Naturally, the first thing they wanted to do was to get rid of these unwelcome guests who came from afar. The Expeditionary Army's end would eventually come. The only reason they were able to hold on for a few decades was because the Empire's most deep-seated enemy had always kept the Expeditionary Army alive. Old General Ambley knew this better than the Federation's Ministry of Defense. They had been away from their homeland for more than a decade, and there was no way back. Now that they had received His Majesty's random order, they might as well go crazy. At the very least, they had to make the Federation pay a heavy price. Yes, tonight, the ferocious attack of the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance could only be described as crazy. Although everyone in the universe knew about the bravery of the Empire's soldiers, the intensity of tonight's battle was still far beyond the expectations of the Federal military. If the Southern Hemisphere was a trap, then the Imperial Expeditionary Force had used the craziest and bloodiest method to forcefully turn this situation into a chaotic situation. The Federation military had planned for this a long time ago, but they still suffered an incomparably heavy blow at the start of the war. It was precisely because they simply couldn't grasp the supreme commander of this regiment, or even the harshness and viciousness of this expeditionary army that was all alone in a foreign land. His Majesty had given a random order, and the expeditionary force fought a crazy battle. The terror and craziness made the Federal Army in the Southern Hemisphere feel as if they were struck by lightning. They looked around and felt gloomy. A relieved smile appeared on Ambley's old face. He let go of his fingers and let the teacup that had accompanied him for many years fall off the high wall of the base. He couldn't hear the shattering sound in the dark night, but he still listened. It seemed that he could only hear the mournful cries of the young people in the Southern Hemisphere as they died. Like jade that is willing to break, but no longer willing to hide in the glacier. The old general looked to the south and murmured softly, "I can't take you back to your homeland alive, so I'll take your souls and the failure of the Federation." High-speed fighter jets swept past at low altitude. The dense cannons plowed a terrifying trail of deep gravel in the wilderness. The Black MX was like a beast in the dark night. It moved quickly through the smoke and dust at an extremely high speed. The missiles fired by the 7 fighter jets at low altitude couldn't hit the strange trembling body of the mech, but they effectively slowed it down. With an extremely beautiful left turn, the Black mech dodged a missile. It left a trail of afterimages in the wilderness as it sped toward a mountain range in front of it. Chapter 412. The air supremacy near Ziichou spaceport was still being contested, but when he received the signal from the Maple Forest Alliance base in the Northern Hemisphere, the blonde Night Wolf Fleet Commander Fu Ding did not hesitate to order 10 high-speed omnidomain cruising fighter jets to speed towards the northeast. He did not care about the loss of ground attack power at all. The target of the fighter jets was a black mecha racing through the wilderness. This mecha was the source of the Empire military's operation this time. In the dimly lit cockpit, the smell of heavy oxygen released by the life support system was very clear. Xu Le's left hand gripped the control stick tightly while the fingers of his right hand quickly swept across the touch screen. In an instant, he entered 14 commands to control the Black MX to perform one dangerous yet beautiful standard evasive maneuver after another amidst the smoke and rain of bullets. The Empire's fighter jets in the night sky above his head were reflected in his eyes through the mecha's SCC system and large radius high-sensitivity radar in the helmet. When they had brushed past the northern area of Ziichou spaceport earlier, these Empire's fighter jets had followed them and had been unable to shake them off. This fact made him very clear that the Empire's orbit-changing satellites were still watching him from outer space. The black box was fixed to the back of the cockpit, while Zhen Shueya sat quietly beside him. It was not designed to be a two-person mecha, so the cockpit was slightly cramped. However, being chased by the Empire's fighter jets the entire way, the two of them were not in the mood to experience the stuffiness and cramping of the cockpit. Shula was not nervous at all. He only felt that it was a little troublesome. The fighter jets in the sky did not carry electromagnetic beam bombs, so it was basically impossible for them to hurt the extremely mobile MX. However, being chased like this by the enemy made him feel as if someone was holding a gleaming dagger behind him, ready to stab him at any moment. It made him feel unusually anxious. A sharp alarm came from the radar. Shula's fingers entered commands as fast as lightning. With a push of the control stick with his left hand, the heavy black mecha was like an extremely nimble toy under his control. On the simple dirt path that was approaching the mountain, the mecha's thick mechanical legs suddenly sprang up and swept diagonally to the right, breaking a thin tree in half. With a whoosh, a heat sensor rocket fell from the sky. Just as the black MX mecha dove into the forest, it struck the already broken thin tree. Amidst the explosion, the mountain rocks cracked, and soil poured down in torrents. Very troublesome. Shula thought silently in his heart. However, he still didn't want to use the simulation system. It wasn't because Jen Shueya was sitting right beside him. It was because the military needed his mecha to be the bait. Then, in this escape plan, they couldn't just aim to escape to Luocho Airport. The real danger was hidden in the simulation of this battle. Right at this moment, a sharp whistle rang out in the skies. A silver-white shadow rushed out from the faint clouds in the skies to the west, flying past the black mecha's head and towards the rear at high speed. The mecha's friend or foe identification system instantly determined that this was a fighter from the Federation. The black MX mech advanced at high speed without turning back. The radar transmitted the scene behind it to the holographic screen of the cockpit. Several blinding lights flashed across the night sky. It should be the large-caliber cannons firing. The Federation's fighter jet that came to support deftly lifted its angle in the air and instantly shot down the Empire's fighter jet that had been following behind Shula the whole time. On the holographic screen, the Empire fighter fell to the ground with green smoke billowing out of it. The Federation fighter flapped its wings slightly in greeting to the mecha on the ground. A grateful smile appeared on Shula's face. His finger tapped the touch screen. The black mecha that was running at high speed gave a thumbs up to the night sky where the aerial battle had just occurred. However, the next moment, in the night sky behind the mecha, a few more Empire mecha joined the fray. Although the Federation mecha that had come to provide support valiantly destroyed one of the Empire mecha, it was ultimately outnumbered and turned into a firework in the night sky. The smile on Shula's face instantly disappeared. He narrowed his eyes and continued to operate in silence like the Empire Fleet Commander. The air combat forces of the Federation's Echo spaceport, although they were also in the midst of a dangerous offensive and defensive battle, still sent out more than 10 fighters to cover the black mecha's escape. Both sides knew very well who was inside this black mecha and what its significance was. With the valiant cover of the Federation fighters, the black MX mech finally shook off the pursuit and harassment of the Empire from the air. It turned into a black stream of fire, passing through the Primeval Forest and stepping over the Black Plains, heading towards the spaceport in the distance at high speed. There was a simple military road in the middle of the plains. The black mecha broke out of the forest and sprinted across the grass. The moment its heavy body landed on the surface of the road, it began to change its state. The thick alloy mechanical legs flipped over and closed together with the sound of hydraulic compression and motors. The side armor automatically pushed out a caterpillar mechanism, and the spherical joints turned into power linkage equipment. A loud grinding sound rang out on the road. The black mecha instantly entered full-speed movement mode. The caterpillar tracks rotated at high speed under the power of the powerful engine, tearing apart the shallow layer of hard concrete on the surface of the road. It carried with it a cloud of dust as it moved forward into the night. The black mecha's mode changes were all completed at high speed, without the slightest hint of deceleration. There was a palpitating sense of simplicity and beauty in its movements. The lighting in the cockpit was dim. Shula operated in silence, his fingers continuously entering commands and activating buttons. Although each of his actions did not appear to be fast, when put together, there was a fairly clear sense of rhythm. No matter how difficult the operation was, he showed no signs of panic. Jian Shuya checked the high-strength laces on her body, using a smile to hide the nervousness in her heart. She reflexively turned to look at him. The two of them were sitting very close to each other. Although the lighting in the cockpit was dim, she could clearly see this man's thick, knife-like eyebrows and that pair of permanently narrowed eyes when she turned her head. The Empire's offensive is fierce. The third line of defense is having a hard time holding on. But you don't have to worry. As long as the fighters behind us can't catch up, at least on this road to Luo Qiu, our Mecca will be safe. Shula took off his helmet and calmed the slight feeling in his heart. He said in a low voice, both the Empire and the Federation have made the wrong judgment. If we go full speed ahead, I can guarantee that before the Empire breaks into this area, we will be able to send you to Luo Qiu Spaceport. He was the designer of the MX. He knew the functions of this black mecha better than the staff officers of the Federation's Department of Defense. Especially after discovering the small note under the right touchscreen, he had infinite confidence in this black MX. But you and I both know that our mecha is bait. So, I'm sorry. I can't go full speed ahead. You will have to continue taking risks with me. The Federal Central Computer, which was that old thing, was connected directly to Shula's brain. He could even know everything that was happening on this planet faster than the Federation's frontline command. Although he couldn't completely understand the entire battle situation on this planet, he could at least calculate some of the problems. At least we don't have to worry about anything now. He pointed at the map on the screen and explained to Jian Shuya, we will arrive at the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge in about 4 hours. In these 4 hours, we will be safe. Okay. Jian Shuya nodded. She was very obedient and didn't say anything. She didn't want to disturb his operation. Ever since she had received the military's request, this national girl knew that her frontline concert tour would definitely be a journey filled with unknown dangers. Right now, she was running with Shula alone on the road of escape. Naturally, she was nervous. But for some reason, seeing Shula's silent and precise operation, her hard-to-suppress nervousness gradually calmed down. In order to conserve energy, after entering full speed mode, Shula had shut down some unnecessary functions of the mecha's life support system. The temperature in the cockpit was gradually rising, and the dim lighting seemed to contain an endless sense of dryness. The straps can be undone. We will be safe for more than 3 hours. You can trust in my judgment. The sweat on his body had soaked his clothes. Shula felt a little uncomfortable, especially with the girl's body pressed tightly against him. The feeling was slightly awkward. Jian Shuya grunted and obediently undid the straps. She didn't ask where his confidence in her safety came from. She took off the black summer jacket that Shula had draped over her. Raising her arm, she wiped the sweat off her face. Because of the heat, her cheeks were flushed red. The cockpit fell silent once more. Only the low rumble of the mecha's twin engines and the occasional rise and fall of the tracks against the ground could be heard. Say something. Shula cautiously observed the darkness around them through the automatic monitoring system. The road is still long. Jian Shuya smiled somewhat helplessly. She cupped her burning face with both hands and gently pulled back her legs. That military uniform skirt of hers was pushed up by this movement, revealing the girl's tight, smooth thighs. I'm a little nervous. The girl lowered her head and said, I don't know what to say. This is the first time I've seen a real battlefield, and seen dead people. I'm very nervous too. Shula pressed a button, allowing the MX mecha to enter a semi-automatic state. With some difficulty, he turned around and took out that black box. Lowering his head, he opened it and said, although I've seen many dead people before, this is also my first time on a battlefield. In the process of taking out the box, his body inevitably rubbed against Jian Shuya's body. That clear sliver of softness made him feel slightly flustered. If it had been a normal member of the opposite sex, perhaps he would have been able to keep his mind clear, but this was Jian Shuya. She had been his dream lover since he was young. Moreover, at the concert earlier, he had even seen such a playful and sexy side of her. Jian Shueya didn't seem to notice these problems. Fanning herself lightly with her small hands, she said in reminiscence, I've sat in a mecha before. That was a few years ago. When Li Feng was first allowed to operate a mecha, he took me in it once. She glanced at Shula's well-defined profile, and a trace of a warm smile flashed through her bright, limpid eyes. But his piloting was very shaky. It wasn't as comfortable as yours. MX's performance is much better. Shula was silent for a moment before saying, and this isn't a river of cars. Chapter 413. The entire journey was silent. The beautiful girl leaned against his arm obediently. The reverberations of the road were clearly transmitted into his mind. The straight road continued forward, but unfortunately, there were no lights, no compound-powered racing cars, only a lonely black mecha. So this was not a sightseeing tour. There was no music playing in the silent cockpit, but the humming of the engine, the soft sound of the hydraulic system, and the low and clear vibration of the metal components were like a song with a strong heavy metal style, lingering in the ears of the young man and woman. From the corner of his eye, Shula saw the faint disappointment on Jian Shueya's beautiful face. He subconsciously lowered his voice and explained, this is a military mission. You are only a civilian, but you are willing to take the risk to be the bait. You are already very brave. Jian Shueya adjusted her sitting position and leaned against his shoulder shyly. After a moment of silence, she said softly, I have a military position. I am studying in the Warship Command Faculty of the First Academy. Shula was slightly taken aback. He immediately remembered that quiet afternoon 2 years ago when this national girl seemed to have been doing a set of test papers filled with structural diagrams. Perhaps that was the entrance exam for the first military academy? The niece of the war god Li Pifu. Having studied in the first military academy, it was not surprising that she had a military identity. Since that was the case, it was only natural that she cooperated with the military. However, there was one question that had always puzzled him. Why did the Ministry of Defense let you be the bait? Why did the people of the Empire attack the South like crazy when they saw you appear on this planet? I once wondered if it was because that old man killed the previous emperor of the Empire. They have always wanted revenge but could not find the opportunity, so they vented their anger on you. But even in the Federation, not many people know about your relationship with Feiqing, and this matter does not make sense. Shula's finger moved the micro button, and a crisp sound rang out in the cockpit of the mecha. Whether it was studying in the university or doing other things, he was always used to silently watching and digesting the information. He rarely asked questions in rapid succession like this. Jian Shueya frowned slightly and moved her body with difficulty. Her face was full of confusion. I don't know the reason, but since the Ministry of National Defense came up with this plan, I believe they must have their reasons. She turned her head to look at Shula's side profile and asked, I didn't ask you before we left. Actually, I also have a big question. According to the plan of the Ministry of Defense, we should be moving together with the mechanical division. Perhaps our speed will be slower, but if the Empire can really tear through the defense line, this mechanical division and your Group 7 can at least cover you for a period of time. Until the last moment when you can't hold on anymore, then you can send me to Luo Qiu. Why did you go against the orders of the Ministry of Defense and take me away alone? You and I don't know where the military's confidence in this plan comes from, but since those big shots are so confident, I'm sure they'll come for you regardless of whether the Imperial Expeditionary Force can see through this trap or not. Shula said, in that case, of course I won't go with the battalion. There will always be deaths in war, but it's always better to have fewer deaths. Jian Shueya's long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and she was silent. After confirming the real reason behind Shula's decision, the girl felt a faint sense of respect and admiration. For Shula, this was a very simple logical problem, but for many people, it was often inconceivable. The Federation fighter that was covering our escape was hit by the Empire. I don't know if the pilot had the chance to jump, but I think he's probably dead. Shula narrowed his eyes and looked at the enlarged electronic map on the screen. He said softly, I've signed a contract with you on behalf of the Whitewater Company. I owe you a life. Your uncle's daughter. No matter how you look at it, I have the obligation to protect you with my life, but those Federation soldiers who don't know the inside story don't have such an obligation. Understood. Jian Shuya rubbed her slightly red cheeks, and her eyes lit up slightly. Looking at Shula's side profile, she smiled sweetly and said, "Then I'll leave my safety to you." "You're welcome." A sincere smile appeared on Shula's face, and he said, "Since the Great War God has entrusted this mission to me without worry, he naturally believes that on planet 5460 tonight, only I can guarantee your safety." "I couldn't tell that you were such a confident person normally," murmured Jian Shuya, gazing at him thoughtfully. "Everyone has their own area of expertise. For me, the MX Mecha is my world. As long as I sit in the mecha, I don't know why, but I feel confident to the point of even being a little arrogant," said Shula to the girl beside him as he listened to the ultrasonic waves in front of them through the monitoring equipment. This was his first time on a real battlefield, but whether it was the cruel and heroic scenes of the northern battlefields transmitted by the old thing or this long and dangerous journey, none of it could disturb his calm. There was no excitement or panic in his heart, only a natural sense of familiarity with the battlefield. Li Feng also said something similar. "It seems that although the two of you are polar opposites in personality, you are very similar in some aspects." Jian Shuya smiled sweetly, her eyes narrowed in an extremely cute manner. She said, "I know you designed the MX, so I'm very curious about what was written on that piece of paper." "The paper is some correction parameters. Although there were hints in the system, that engineer who made the adjustments still habitually used paper to tell me these things." Shula thought of that genius girl far away on the capital ring, and said with a smile, "The MX Mecha we're sitting in has already had most of its long-range firepower systems removed, and the synchronization speed of the central control system has also been slightly adjusted. This is more suitable for me to perform." "Him or her?" "Her name is Shong Qiu, the first-level technical supervisor of Nutshell, one of the true designers of the MX." Jian Shuya used her thin index finger to brush away the slightly wet purple strands of hair beside her face. Looking at Shula with a chuckle, she asked with a hint of innocence, "Shong Qiu, what's your relationship with her?" "Ah, a pure relationship between a man and a woman." Shula also narrowed his eyes as he replied with a smile. "Perhaps it was the smell of smoke on this planet, or perhaps it was the dry and hot air in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was the flames of war, death, and escape he had seen along the way, but this Donglin rock suddenly found a trace of his youthful playfulness. He even dared to make such a joke in front of the woman of his dreams. However, this kind of joke was not very interesting." Jian Shuya rubbed her nose in boredom, but immediately after, because of a sudden collision between the tracks of the mecha and a protrusion on the road, she jumped up. She subconsciously let out a soft cry as she grabbed tightly onto Shula's arm. Throughout the night, the black mecha ran silently in the night wind. The journey was peaceful, but this planet was already filled with the sorrow of death. The young man and woman in the mecha did not want to recall the Federation mecha that had crashed into the plains, did not want to think about how many people were dying at this time, so they could only force themselves to be calm and chat. However, the sorrow of death was ultimately the starting point of panic, and the woman's panic was the source of the man's pity. "Don't be afraid. You really don't have to be afraid, I'm here," he once again forcefully repeated. Shula felt the delicate skin and soft body of the girl beside him, but there was no desire in his heart. Just like what Uncle had taught him in the past, a normal young man who had given most of his youth to his hands would find it difficult to be lustful whenever he saw a girl he truly liked. The black MX mecha ran silently towards the northeast direction. When it was about to enter the mountainous area west of Luo Chou spaceport, he suddenly pulled on the control stick, and the mecha instantly entered a static state. Looking at the latest battle situation and the detection results of this mountainous area sent by the Federal Central Computer in his left eye, Shula's thick, knife-like eyebrows raised. His pupils shrank, and he said to Jian Shuya beside him, "Tie yourself up tighter." Jian Shuya was slightly stunned. Using the back of her hand to wipe away the sweat on her cheeks, she earnestly followed his instructions and carefully tied the straps around her body. She used a lot of strength to tie the straps around her body. Through the dark military uniform and short skirt, the straps slightly sank into the girl's soft body. In this dangerous and tense moment, the seductive atmosphere in the cockpit became even more intense. Shula quickly took off his clothes, revealing his well-proportioned and strong naked body. Forcing himself not to look at Jian Shuai's shocked expression, he shamelessly took out the simulation system from the box and silently started to install it. Although she was sure that the boy beside her wasn't a pervert who would take advantage of the situation, Jian Shuai couldn't help but exclaim softly when she suddenly saw him naked. She covered her eyes with her hands tightly. Her cheeks, which were originally slightly red, were now as red as an apple in autumn, glowing red and glistening. It was unknown when, but the two pairs of hands that were covering their faces had revealed a sliver of space. Occasionally, a trace of curiosity could be seen, and their eyes were filled with curiosity. Shula didn't know that the nation's girl beside him was peeping. Only now did he remember the problem with the simulation system. He didn't have time to deal with it, so he was too embarrassed to turn around. "It's done," he said in a low voice. "Enhanced mobile platform." Jian Shuai stared in shock at the system on Shula's body, covering her mouth in disbelief as she exclaimed. Her voice was very soft. Shula was in the midst of his final preparations for the mecha battle, so he didn't hear her clearly. "If you can hold on, don't use the life support system helmet." Shula narrowed his eyes at the display on the holographic screen and said in a serious tone, "Later on, the tumbling will be very bad. You might vomit, and it might clog up the helmet." Jian Shuai put down the hand she had been using to cover her mouth and nodded blankly. Only then did the orders from the Federation Command Center ring out in the mecha. "Change of plan, Lieutenant Colonel Shula. The charter has just confirmed that the Empire's Maple Forest Alliance's Moonwolf Group has broken through the defense line and infiltrated Chenggong Ridge. Command Center orders you to take Miss Jian Shuai and immediately retreat to the southwest direction." Shula was silent for a moment, then abnormally cut off the communication. Under Jian Shuai's shocked gaze, he took a deep breath, his face slightly pale, and put on the helmet. The vision of the helmet was the valley behind them. In the darkness of the night, the valley seemed abnormally quiet, but the faint sound of drums could be heard from behind the valley. War drums. It wasn't war drums, it was heavy mecha advancing at high speed. The high frequency of the alloy mecha and the rocky ground seemed to be beating on the hearts of the young man and woman. A black and green Empire mecha suddenly appeared at the mouth of the valley. The next moment, countless black and green Empire mechas surged out of the valley. Chapter 414. The Empire's Moonwolf third-generation mecha had a single jet engine and a lightweight outer armor design. Whether it was in terms of quality or firepower, it was not as good as the Federation's standard M52 series mecha. The Empire's soldiers were brave and good at fighting. They could endure hardships and had amazing perseverance. In the design of the Moonwolf mecha, they tried their best to reduce the life support system while leaving most of the power output. Therefore, the Moonwolf mecha had always been known in the universe for its high speed and light speed. Together with the black and green streamlined outer armor, it looked like an alloy spirit beast that silently moved through the forest. It was precisely because of the Moonwolf mecha's unique design and innate danger that this most powerful mecha assault force of the Empire's Expeditionary Force, Maple Forest Alliance, was able to take advantage of the planet's sea of fire and the desperate stalemate between the northern and southern battlefronts to follow the 17 mecha clans tore open the distorting cracks in the Iron Curtain at all costs to silently and ruthlessly penetrate deep into the southern hemisphere. They arrived at the valley of Chenggong Ridge and followed the tail of the Federation's black mecha. Perhaps this was a trap set up by the federal military, but the Empire's Moonwolf group looked coldly at the possible ambush ahead. This was because they firmly believed that since their full mecha squad could hide from the eyes of the Federation, they would definitely bring a great surprise to the other party. They were very confident in their own strength. 3 black and green Moonwolf mechas suddenly shot out like arrows, separated from the main group and rushed towards the black mecha on the outskirts of the valley. A series of rhythmic yet murderous Imperial language rang out from within the Moonwolf mechas that swarmed out of the valley. "Kill that little star. The Maple Forest Alliance's Moonwolf group, a full mecha configuration, had a total of 115 third-generation mechas of the Empire, and they were all mobilized tonight. These outstanding Imperial pilots quickly operated the mechas on their hands and did not reply to the command on the comms system. This was because when they heard that voice, they knew that if they could not kill the Federation national girl in the mecha in front of them today, the commander would definitely kill them all personally in anger. Luo Fu, the leader of the Night Wolf Mecha Brigade, a colonel of the Empire. He was one of the top 5 ace mecha pilots in the Imperial Expeditionary Force. Back then, he had the opportunity to enter the Emperor's Special Mecha Battalion, but in the end, he resolutely chose to follow the Expeditionary Force to a faraway land. It was because he firmly believed that he could only display his abilities on a real battlefield. Through the monitor screen, this Empire elite with a beard as long as wild grass stared coldly at the fleeing black mecha. Listening to the combat power evaluation sent back by the central control computer, he issued the order to attack. The heavy sound of the mecha running echoed through the quiet night sky. Countless mecha gushed out from the mouth of the valley like a stream of greenish-black molten lava, vowing to bury the Federation mecha at the forefront. The central control computer had already given an early warning, but when the other party appeared before them, the Black MX mecha's SSC system and large semi-aperture radar finally confirmed the existence of the mecha horde. This fact made Shula feel a tinge of fear towards the camouflage ability of the Empire mecha. At this time, his communication with the command center had already been cut off. The reason he had refused the command center's order to retreat to the southwest was because he knew that once they deviated from the original plan, perhaps the safety of himself and Jian Shueya would be more guaranteed, but the main force lying in ambush ahead would not be able to achieve the results they had planned. Wish me good luck. He felt the slight numbness and itch from every inch of his skin. He took a deep breath, and the warm current in his body instantly spread to every part of his body. Then, through the simulation system that stuck close to his skin, it accurately magnified and transmitted to every part of the MX mecha. His narrowed eyes shone brightly, but his face was rather pale. This was the first time he had seen an Empire citizen up close, the first time he had met an Empire citizen on the battlefield, and this first meeting was a life-and-death battle. Jian Shueya gripped the metal pole beside her tightly, trying her best to get as far away from Shula as possible, afraid that she would interfere with his operation. Feeling the slight dizziness brought about by the instant acceleration of the mecha beneath her, she said seriously, "I am a jinx." This was not a joke. In such a tense moment of escape, the young girl was in no mood to joke. She was truly worried that her strange fate would bring misfortune to Shula. Shula smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. In the dim cockpit, the sunlight was enough to make one feel dizzy. He said, "I am a jinx." That said, he pushed the control stick once more. The MX mecha's twin engines roared to life, and with a deafening roar, the heavy mecha was like a monster. It crashed through a large tree in front of it and then fled into the distance. The mechanical arms of the Empire's Moon Wolf mecha opened fire. The originally quiet valley that only had the sound of drums was suddenly filled with countless screeching sounds. Mountain rocks shattered, clouds of smoke billowed, and high-speed rotating shrapnel shot towards the black mecha in front of them like raindrops. Love had already received the orders from the Northern Hemisphere Command earlier, so he knew that there might be some kind of danger waiting for his mecha team ahead. However, he was not too worried. With 100 mechas gathered into a torrent, even an entire team of mechanics would not be able to stop him. What made him laugh coldly was that the strange-looking Federation mecha in front of him actually did not change its direction of escape. Could it be that the pilot wanted to use those heavy metal blocks of the Federation to compete with him in terms of speed? In the end, that black mecha was enveloped in a sea of fire and a rain of bullets. He operated the Empire's newest fourth-generation mecha and commanded hundreds of black and green mechas to chase after the enemy. He watched the scene on the screen coldly, waiting for the enemy's mecha to be destroyed and its people to be killed. Stupid bait, stupid trap. However, right after that, his eyes narrowed. This was because he clearly saw that the Black Federation mecha actually charged through the rain of bullets, and there was not a single trace of damage on the mecha's body. How did he do this? Love stared fiercely at the black mecha that was getting faster and faster. From the dead silence of the communication system, he knew that the three mechas at the front and the subordinate mechas at the back were all shocked by the scene in front of them. Precise dodging within a small area. Who is this pilot? Love's expression turned serious, and he controlled the mecha below him to instantly increase its speed. In an instant, it rushed out of the dense formation of mechas, and rushed towards the black mecha at an extremely high speed. The mechas from the Imperial Moonwolf group were obviously shocked by the super dodging ability of the black mecha, but they did not slow down their speed, especially the three black and green mechas at the front. With the help of the auxiliary rocket engine, they suddenly shot forward and caught up to the back of the black MX. Looking at the Federation mecha that was just inches away from them, and thinking about how the pilot in this mecha was actually able to withstand the previous long-range attack without any damage, the three mechas simultaneously gave up on attacking with firepower, and chose to engage in close combat instead. Decades of battlefield experience had already proven that in close combat, the Empire mechas that had the advantage of speed were more agile and had more destructive power, especially tonight when it was 3 against 1. The three black and green Moonwolf mechas stomped heavily on the soft ground, bringing along with them a large amount of black mud. Like three ferocious beasts, they charged forward in parallel, and the alloy blades on their mechanical arms shot out with a whoosh, ruthlessly stabbing towards the back of the black MX. All these actions were completed under the condition of absolute speed. Dodging the long-range attacks of mechas was not too difficult for the current Shuler. In reality, although the hundreds of mechas from the Empire were like a terrifying iron stream pouring out of the valley, his nervousness was still from his first experience on the battlefield, and had nothing to do with cowardice. As the designer, he understood the performance of the Black MX too well, and because of this understanding, he had endless confidence. The Federation's newest generation of dual-engine mecha, appearing on the battlefield for the first time, the Empire soldiers who were caught off guard would definitely pay a heavy price. Following his quick operation, Lin Bian's Black MX mecha came to an abrupt halt. With a perfect twist of its body, it avoided the incoming alloy blade from its right. Then, with a seemingly casual but extremely precise punch, it struck out viciously into the cockpit of the Imperial mecha directly behind it. The heavy sound of metal hitting metal rang out, and it was abnormally unpleasant to the ears. Countless night birds in the forest, who were already suffering from insomnia due to the cannon fire in the distance, could no longer bear the heavy burden and flew into the sky, battered and exhausted. That ferocious Imperial mecha did not even have the slightest chance of defending itself against this simple close-range attack of the Black MX mecha. The cockpit of the mecha was miserably deformed, sparks flying everywhere as green smoke rose. Amidst the green smoke, the mecha fell powerlessly to its knees on the ground, accompanied by the unpleasant sound of components breaking apart. With one hit, the Black MX, in a posture that defied common sense, used its heavy mechanical legs to push off the ground, and flew backwards. In mid-air, the huge body of the mecha actually forcefully turned around again. The Black MX landed on the ground with both feet, but it did not make any adjustments. It completely ignored the two Empire mechas on the side, and with a roar, it once again fled forward. A simple turn, a close-range attack, and it destroyed a Night Wolf 3rd generation mecha. Love, who was rushing over at high speed, saw this unbelievable scene, and his face turned extremely pale. As an ace pilot, he quickly deduced that the reason for this shocking result was because the Empire mecha could not react at all in front of the Black mecha's high-speed movement. What kind of hand speed was required to execute such a high frequency of mecha movements? Love did not believe that in this universe, there was anyone who could achieve such a hand speed, unless the pilot in the Black mecha was the pride of the Empire, the little princess, or the military god of the Federation. Although in the intelligence of the Empire military, there was a lieutenant colonel of the Federation at the Bermuda Mineral Star who seemed to be able to achieve such a level, he did not believe it at all. He only thought that it was a disguise made by the military to cover up their own incompetence. Love's eyes were like a wolf's, and he stared fiercely at the Black mecha in front of him that was moving faster and faster. It was obvious that whether it was the pride of the Empire or the glory of the Federation, neither would appear on this planet at this time. So, there was only one explanation: the power output and instantaneous explosive speed of this Black Federation mecha had completely suppressed the third-generation mecha of the Empire. Could it be the rumored MX? Chapter 4:15. Listen up. Other than killing the little star, I want that mecha. Captain Love's cold voice came out of the communication system of the Empire Mecha Group. This ace mecha pilot was shocked by the performance of the Federation mecha, but he quickly calmed down. After confirming that the mecha in front of him was the rumored new MX mecha developed by the Federation, he wasn't scared. Instead, he had a strong desire to capture that powerful mecha. He had more than 100 third-generation mechas from the Empire. More importantly, although the performance of the mecha was important, the piloting ability of the pilot was still the most important factor. The Northern Hemisphere Command had long warned him that the opponent might be a new MX mecha, but he had not paid much attention to it. It was only until that moment earlier, when he had witnessed the terrifying performance of that black mecha in its simple and effortless manner, that he had truly thought of capturing the other for the Empire's research. Love's piloting and hand speed had already surpassed level 4. Now, he was standing on the threshold of level 5. He was very confident. The corners of his lips curled up in a cruel sneer, and the speed at which his hands operated suddenly increased. The speed of the new Gen 4 mecha which he had been suppressing all this time increased rapidly, turning into a cloud of dust that could devour people as it raced towards the front of the formation. The black MX mecha in front and the intimidating group of Empire mecha chasing behind didn't use long-range heat source weapons. They were chasing and escaping silently. The sound of the mecha running in the valley and in the wilderness was very clear. The entire night started to tremble. A chilling atmosphere was created. The black and green mecha of the Empire sprinted at high speed, kicking up countless streams of dust in their wake. It was an exceptionally spectacular sight. Meanwhile, that black mecha of the Federation, MX, was sprinting silently half a kilometer away. The current scene was like a group of grassland wolves that had smelled blood and suddenly discovered a lone lion. They were unwilling to give up, and they all wanted to rush forward and bite the lion fiercely once, twice, until the lion was torn into thousands of pieces of bloody flesh. In the midst of this pack of savage grassland wolves, there was a black-green mecha of a slightly different shape that appeared larger and more ferocious. Its speed was clearly much faster than the Imperial mecha beside it. In just a few breaths, it had already broken through from the midsection of the mecha pack to the very front. Using the SSC capture system, Shula easily identified the unique Empire mecha in the field of vision of the helmet. According to the data provided by the Department of Defense, this should be the 4th-generation mecha that the Empire had just successfully developed 7 years ago. The speed and piloting of the 4th-generation mecha made him squint his eyes. He felt a slight pressure. The person in the 4th-generation mecha was a master. "Are you a little dizzy?" Being chased by more than 100 Empire mechas, Shula's simple and precise hand controls brushed past like the wind, not slowing down in the slightest. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and asked a completely unrelated question. The nation's maiden lowered her head weakly, her right hand covering her slightly exposed breasts. She wasn't worried that Shula would see anything, but she felt a little stuffy in her chest. Previously, the black MX mech suddenly swept backward, twisted its body, and threw a punch. These seemingly simple actions were all carried out at an extremely high speed. The pilot in the cockpit had to bear an extremely large load. Due to the gravitational pull, the load was even greater than that of the spacefighter pilot. Shula's body was like a well-polished machine. Naturally, there were no adverse reactions. However, Jian Shui, who sat beside him, suffered quite a bit. If she hadn't been tied tightly to the cockpit, she would probably have been seriously injured. Find something to do and distract yourself. That should be better. Shula looked at the Empire mecha moving faster and faster in his field of vision, as well as the cloud of mecha behind it. Although he knew that the opponent would not be able to catch up to him, he still felt some trepidation in his heart. In a slightly hoarse voice, he said, "Look at this red button. Later, when I tell you to press it hard." Jian Shuai looked at the red button his right hand was pointing at and guessed that this must be some key control of the MX mecha. She raised her head to look at the man beside her and asked in surprise, "You want me to press it?" "I'm afraid you'll get airsick," explained Shula seriously. Jian Shuai laughed bitterly. She really didn't know what this man's nerves were made of. In such a tense situation, he actually had the mood to joke around. Strength-determined attitude, the black MX mecha had not entered overclocking mode, but it still maintained a high enough speed. Although the cloud of Imperial mecha behind it was continuously closing the distance between them and the black mecha with their lightweight and high-speed advantage, they were still more than 200 meters away. "Follow him. Don't use your jet acceleration for now. I really want to see where this mecha wants to lead us to." Luo Fu stared coldly at the Federation's mecha in front of him. He was alarmed. The Empire had always had the advantage in terms of speed in mecha battles. However, in tonight's pursuit, this advantage was almost gone. The fourth-generation mecha he was operating had already rushed to the front of the group, only about 100 meters away from the black mecha. However, he did not use any long-range attacks for the time being. The mecha horde ran madly, the earth trembling and dust filling the air, but they were still unable to catch up to that damned black mecha in front. In this spectacular yet silent chase in the wilderness, apart from the stunning punch at the very beginning, not a single cannon or bullet was fired. It was just silence. However, who would have thought that the black MX in front of them was under so much pressure, and what kind of danger it was taking? Amidst the silence, the pressure, and the scent of danger, within the 200-meter distance that made Shula so relaxed and enraged the Imperial mecha horde so crazily, the black MX and the cloud of Imperial mecha behind it ran out of the plains, one in front and one behind. Away from the valley, past the forest, across the black plains, a mountain range could be vaguely seen at the end of the road. It was impossible to see the yellowish color of the mountain range in the darkness of the night, but through the precise positioning of the charter computer in his mind and the electronic map on board, Shula easily determined that the line between Yellow Mountain Ridge and Lonely Mountain Ridge was just ahead. According to the Ministry of Defense's plan, the Federation's ambush force should be here. His eyes narrowed behind his helmet. With a light flick of his right hand, he reconnected with the Federation's command center. In a low voice, he said, "I have already entered the Yellow Mountain Ridge line. More than 100 third-generation Imperial mecha are 100 meters behind me. Please accept." In the Southern Hemisphere's Federal Army Command Center Hall, the officers who had become abnormally silent and oppressed due to the MX mecha's automatic disconnection instantly let out a collective sigh of relief when they heard this long-awaited voice. In reality, through the remnants of the glory of the Charter in the Southern Hemisphere, hundreds of officers in the command center had been watching that spectacular escape on the ground. However, it was very difficult for them to grasp the specific situation around that black mecha. The Federation's third-highest commander, General Nelson, frowned slightly and said, "Notify Commander Shouching." Then, he turned around and said calmly, "That Empire satellite in the sky can be shot down now." The Empire had 3 autonomous orbit-changing satellites invading the Southern Hemisphere's space. Previously, the Federal military had already shot down 2 of them, but they had purposely left one behind. The sinister intent behind this was very clear. The Federation Command Center did not want the Empire to chase after the bait only to lose it in the end. At this time, since the Black Mecha had already lured the Empire's ambush team into the encirclement, what was the point of leaving this orbit-changing satellite? General Nelson's expression was relaxed, but his heart was not. The Federation's third defense line was still enduring the crazy and bloody continuous attacks of the Empire's armored forces. Otherwise, he would not have watched the Moonwolf group break into the Southern Hemisphere without doing anything. Although they were luring the enemy in, the number of enemies they lured in seemed to be too many and too strong. Du Shouching, I hope your Iron 7th Division can be as powerful on the battlefield as it was in the drill, General Nelson thought to himself as he looked at the electronic map on the large screen. In a situation where they could not receive follow-up support, an entire division of mechanics trying to ambush and eat the Empire's mecha team. This was not something a normal person could do. However, at this time, a sharp alarm sounded in the command center. A military staff officer reported loudly with an extremely ugly expression, "The Empire's backup assault team has infiltrated to the 17th latitude of the south. They are currently following the path of the first wave of mecha teams and heading towards Luocho spaceport." Everyone in the command center was shocked. They all looked at General Nelson. General Nelson waved his hand to indicate that he understood. He seemed to have a well-thought-out plan, but in his heart, he started to feel uneasy. There were too many variables on the battlefield. The Federation took the initiative to lure the Empire's people to invade the south, but they did not expect that old general of the Empire to actually show a suicidal attitude and launch a direct attack by a large group that had never been seen before in the past 10 years. Under the crazy attacks of the Maple Forest Alliance, the Federation's defense line was in danger. The backup military force that was originally in the tactical simulation had no choice but to be deployed to the front line. At least for the next 2 hours, the command center would not be able to deploy any troops to support the front line. General Nelson's expression was serious. Moonwolf Group and Maple Forest Alliance's 18,000 soldiers. He no longer expected the Iron 7th Division to be able to destroy the enemy. He only hoped that Du Shaoqing could hold on for a while longer. As long as the front line could catch a breather, the Westwood's 8th Army could move to the south, and victory would definitely belong to the Federation. But could the Iron 7th Division hold on for that long? The Empire's people seemed determined to win. Could that Black MX mecha escape to Luocho? Standing between the rocks, Du Shaoqing put down the night vision electronic binoculars in his hands and put on his sunglasses again, even though it was late at night and there was no moon. There was no need for the Federation's command center to send a message. The Iron 7th Division hidden on the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge knew that the person they had been waiting for a long time had finally arrived. Smoke and dust had already risen from the flat field on the left side of the mountain range. In the night, a Black MX mecha silently turned into a stream of light and passed through the difficult mountain path below the Iron 7th Division's ambush position. Not far behind him were the 10 mechas closest to the Empire's mecha group. "Get ready," Shimin Jin said to the electronics officer beside him in a low voice. Du Shaoqing took off his sunglasses and coldly glanced at the Black Federation mecha that passed by at high speed. Then, he glanced at the Empire's mecha group that seemed to be moving behind him and said, "Don't panic." Chapter 416. He put on and took off his sunglasses. While he was speaking, 10 Imperial Moonwolf mechas roared past and chased after the escaping Black MX mecha. Even though the Iron 7 Division ambushing in the mountains suddenly attacked, they could no longer help the Black mecha. There's a 4th-generation mecha. It should be the leader of the Moonwolf team, Love. He's one of the top 5 ace pilots in the Imperial Expeditionary Force, Shimin Jin whispered. Shimin Jin reminded him in a low voice. He would definitely not question his teacher's command. However, seeing that the Federation's Black mech was being chased into danger by the Empire's people, he was a little worried about the pilot and the national girl in the mech. Du Shaoqing's expression was cold and stern as he stared at the Imperial mecha horde in the direction of the Lonely Ridge. He said indifferently, "This is a bag, and we are the rope that ties the bag. What are some small fries that slip through? What we want to eat is this entire mecha brigade behind us." If the Iron 7 Division had attacked just now, the Empire mecha horde that had suddenly slowed down for some reason would definitely know that there was an ambush here. If the mecha horde had decided to turn around and retreat, with the high mobility of the Moonwolf mechas, the Iron 7 Division would never have been able to catch up. They could only watch as the enemy turned into dust. As for Love, the ace pilot of the Imperial Expeditionary Force, this iron-blooded teacher didn't care at all. "The Ministry of Defense asked us to ensure the safety of Jian Shueya," Shimin Jin said in a low voice. Du Shaoqing lowered his eyes slightly and said, "The one driving the Black MX is Shu Le. He won't die so easily." Shimin Jin was shocked. He silently retreated to the back and nervously began to prepare for the Imperial Moonwolf group's arrival. However, what made him and the soldiers of the Iron 7 Division uneasy was that, for some reason, The Empire mecha horde outside of the ambush not only slowed down but also showed signs of stopping. In the mountains, it was quiet. At this time, the latest battle situation from the Federation command reached Du Shaoqing's ears. He was silent for a moment, then he took a deep breath, raised his head, and looked at the horizon in the distance. Maple Forest Alliance's final trump card, that reserve assault brigade, had also come. Commander Du Shaoqing had a complicated expression in his eyes. The bait plan of the Department of National Defense had lured in an army that was twice their size. However, the command center couldn't send any reinforcements. If Maple Forest Alliance's assault team and mechas were able to tear apart the bag and attack Luoqiu Airport, they would be able to threaten the side of the military supply depot. The Federal Army would be in absolute danger. General Amberry from the Northern Hemisphere was able to create such a situation out of the impossible. It could be said that he was a godly commander. Decades ago, on the same planet, in the same mountain range, the same Iron 7 Division. Once, under almost exactly the same circumstances, they fought a bloody battle of life and death. That battle made the Iron 7 Division famous in the media. Except for the leaders of the federal military, no one knew that it was the fatal mistake made by the Iron 7 Division at the beginning of this bloody battle that led to the heavy losses of the federal military. It seemed that tonight on the front line of Huangshanling Lonely Ridge, there would be another extremely tragic sniper battle. Du Shaoqing quietly looked at the night sky and thought silently in his heart. Did his father stand in the same position as him? What was he thinking at that time? History seemed to be repeating itself, but the result would definitely not be the same. He coldly unbuttoned the collar of his trench coat and turned to face the officers of the division headquarters. He said calmly, "A brigade of 18,000 people is on its way here. I will only give you 1 hour. You must eat these 100 ugly Imperial mecha, without air support, without a missile base." An entire division wanted to eat an entire Imperial mecha brigade, an entire mecha brigade with 100 third-generation Moonwolf mecha. Whether it was in the military academy's teaching materials or in a real battle, this had never happened before, because this was something that was impossible in the first place. However, after the senior officers of the Iron 7 Division heard their division commander's words, they only nodded firmly in silence. This was the first battle after the Iron 7 Division returned to the front line. They must win. Shimen Jin stood behind her division commander who was looking at the electronic map for the last time. Looking at her division commander's slightly trembling body, she suddenly felt a little sour in her heart. She said in a low voice, "The Imperial Mecha Group is obviously waiting for reinforcements from the brigade at the rear. What if they still refuse to come in after 10 minutes? Should we move forward with Operation Lightning?" "No need." Du Shaoqing raised his head and took the hot towel from the orderly. He wiped his face in the darkness of the valley and said, "The Imperial soldiers are brave and impulsive. If we kill their leader, they will naturally go crazy." Shimen Jin was stunned. She thought that the commander of the Moonwolf group, Luo Fu, had already chased after Shu Le. How could they kill him if they stayed in the mountains? Let the battlefield communication system scan a radius of 50 meters. "I want to talk to that black MX. Du Shaoqing folded the towel and passed it to the orderly. "You guys wait for the brigade at the back." Commander Luo Fu left the mecha group and led the 9 most outstanding third-generation mechas under his command to chase after Ling Lan. Before he chased after Ling Lan, he gave an important order to the entire mecha brigade through the communication system. The ambush at the front line of the Yellow Mountain was not the most important part of the war. However, it was the most important part. The headquarters of the Maple Forest Alliance in the Northern Hemisphere had long confirmed the possible locations of the Federation's ambush. They had even accurately calculated the ambush forces that the Federation could mobilize at this time by analyzing the takeoff and landing frequency and the garbage volume of the 2 major airports in the Southern Hemisphere in the recent month. "It's just 1 division." A disdainful sneer appeared on Love's face. He was sure that the Federation commander hiding in the mountains wouldn't dare to expose himself just because of these 10 mechas. Therefore, he bravely passed through the mountain path and chased after the black MX. he said coldly to his subordinates through the communication system. "After I destroy that black MX, I will come back and meet with you guys." Shula didn't know that the master in the Moonwolf 4th generation mecha behind him was saying that he was going to destroy him with a confident and arrogant tone. At this time, the mountain path was ending and Luocho Airport was not far away. The escape with the nation's young lady was coming to an end. He was unusually calm and relaxed. However, that insensible old man told him that other than the mecha brigade at the back, the Empire had actually sent out the assault brigade, their trump card. In the military system of the Empire, a brigade was more powerful than a division of the Federation. The Federation headquarters didn't tell Shula this information. In their opinion, Shula was lucky enough to bring Jian Shueya safely to Luocho Airport. Plus, the ambush behind them had nothing to do with him. He didn't know which brigade was ambushing them at the front line of the Huangshanling Lonely Ridge. However, from the old bastard's prediction, this brigade would definitely be in a terrible situation. At this moment, the military channel of the MX mecha rang. Shula was very familiar with the voice, but he didn't like it. "I'm Du Shaoqing. I'm one of the 10 mechas chasing after you. The one in the 4th generation mecha should be the brigade leader, Luo Fu." "Shula, kill him." Shula's eyes narrowed in shock. Only now did he know that the ambush was actually carried out by the Iron 7th Division. In the channel, that iron-faced commander's voice was as cold and direct as it was a few months ago. It sounded extremely rude, but he knew this person very well. This time, the other didn't use his military position to order him around. This was already very different. He only needed half a second to think. He narrowed his eyes, opened the universal channel, and said a single word. "Okay." In one of Master Schiller's plays, there was a mentally handicapped person who loved to run. That mentally handicapped person ran all over Planet S1, ran all over the Capital Ring, and in the end, even ran all the way to the Westwoods. He even ran on a spaceship. This mentally handicapped person became a celebrity in human society. Countless people followed him, running non-stop, not asking for a reason, just running non-stop. However, one day, this mentally handicapped person suddenly didn't want to run anymore. He felt bored, so he stopped, and then turned around, saying that he wanted to go home, leaving his followers with endless emptiness and the disappointment of the media. Running was a habit. Once started, it was hard to stop. If one really stopped after running for a long time, it would always be hard to get used to. The mechas chased each other for an unknown amount of time tonight. Suddenly, the Black Federation mecha at the end of the mountain road ahead stopped abruptly, then slowly turned around. Out of the 10 Empire mechas, 9 of them stopped for a moment. The pilots in the cockpits couldn't believe what they were seeing. Because of the intense shock in their hearts, their operations were affected. Only that 4th generation Moonwolf mech, which had an exceptionally strong contrast between black and green, did not slow down in the slightest. Instead, the rocket jets at the back of the mech instantly shot out, the powerful propulsion causing its speed to become incomparably fast. Just this small detail was enough to prove that Captain Love of the 4th generation mecha had the most determined mind and the most ruthless eyes of an ace mecha pilot. With a straight arrow of smoke, the 4th generation Moonwolf mecha charged towards the Black MX. At such a high speed, this mecha even used the mechanical arm on its right hand to draw a symbol in the air. Shula was a professional soldier, so he didn't have much understanding of the universal machine language. Thinking back to the time when he was in Yue University, when he had a mecha battle with that officer of the First Academy, it had caused quite a commotion. However, he could roughly understand what the Empire mecha pilot was trying to say. Thus, wearing the simulation system, he did not hesitate to give the mecha a middle finger. At the same time, in the dim cockpit, a slender index finger pressed hard on the red button amidst the hissing sounds of compressed air. A few heavy components of the Black MX body shot out one after another, smashing onto the ground. Surprisingly, the thick armor on the right shoulder did not fall off, and the middle finger of the right alloy hand stood straight up, facing the enemy. This MX was a special mecha that Shang Qiu had specially modified for Shu Le. Originally, it did not have the fire control system that most normal pilots would need, so the components fell off very quickly. In just 1 second. The black mecha had officially entered overclocking mode. At this time, the 4th-generation Moonwolf mecha had already arrived in front of the Black MX with an unstoppable momentum. The next moment, Love's pupils suddenly shrank in the cockpit. This was because the Federation mecha in the vision of his helmet had disappeared. A strong sense of danger surged into his heart. Relying on his rich battle experience, Love roared and forced himself to turn around in an instant. The black and green mech forcefully turned around at high speed, its thick mechanical arm blocking the front, just in time to block the silent punch from the night sky. With a low hum, the Black MX mecha's powerful twin engines were fully displayed in this one hit. The 4th-generation Moonwolf mecha was forced to retreat. Then, the Black mecha forcefully increased its speed again. It turned into a flash of lightning and once again attacked the chest of the Black Moonwolf mecha. The speed of the Black MX was too fast, and the frequency of its movements was too fast. It was like countless rocks falling from a mountaintop, striking the surface of the Moonwolf mecha's armor with crisp and powerful sounds, producing a continuous series of dull pa sounds. Love's face was pale. He pushed his control to the limit. In this life and death situation, he had already performed beyond his usual standards. However, he still could not keep up with the Black mecha's movement. The Black MX dodged at high speed on the mountain path. There were no after images. It was just like a flash of lightning or a ghost. To Love, it was more like a sharp and powerful bullet that he was terrified of. It kept shooting towards his face. Bullets could not turn, but this Black MX was able to move in a straight line at high speed. It was like a high-speed bullet that was bouncing back and forth in an alloy plate. What kind of hand speed was required to perform such a terrifying control? Or rather, what kind of freakish hand was required to perform such a control? Or rather, it was impossible to perform such a control by hand. When the 9 third-generation Moonwolf mechas of the Empire rushed to the battlefield, they were greeted by this shocking sight. They could only watch with their own eyes as the Moonwolf mecha controlled by Commander Love was continuously bombarded by the Black MX of the Federation, unable to retaliate at all. Under such immense shock, they were unable to react at all. According to the memories of a pilot who had survived the incident, he had never seen such mecha piloting in his entire life. He could not understand how a mecha weighing dozens of tons could perform such unimaginable maneuvers. The ground of the mountain path had clearly festered, but that Federation pilot had not been able to slow down the Black mecha's movements in the slightest. What had left the deepest impression on the surviving pilot was the close combat style of the Black MX mech. The strong mecha fighters all had their own close combat style. Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng was bold and violent, Bai Yulon was sinister and silent, and Ju Yu was serious and serious. As for the Black MX controlled by Shu Le, in this first battle, the style it displayed was simple and direct. It could even be described as plain. Shu Le understood the structure of mecha very well. Although the mecha designs of the Empire and the Federation were very different, the two sides of the universe had the same thinking habits. There was not much difference in terms of ideology. Therefore, every time he attacked, he would often attack the most inconspicuous part of the Black and Green Moonwolf mecha. Only the mechanics would understand the key points of the mecha. It was extremely precise and precise. Simple, direct, plain, precise, and precise. When these 5 adjectives were stacked together, the style was mixed into a pile. When it was combined to the extreme, it became a silent ruthlessness, a silent suppression. In the 4th-generation Moonwolf mecha, Captain Love clearly felt the terror of this style. He was the ace pilot of the Empire. However, when he came here arrogantly, he was in despair. Although the Moonwolf mecha was able to avoid 3 lightning strikes from the Black MX's tooth-edge alloy blade, his heart was getting colder and colder. He was getting more and more desperate. That dark and helpless danger was about to take over his mind. A crisp sound rang out. The black light condensed into a single point. That was the Black MX that had stopped moving. The Black mecha pulled out a spinning alloy blade from the edge of the cockpit of the 4th-generation Moonwolf mecha. For any mecha, the front of the cockpit was definitely the strongest defense. However, The black mecha continuously threw 7 or 8 heavy punches at that spot, followed by a final stab. No matter how strong the armor of the Empire mecha was, it was finally broken. Sparks shot out from the edge of the cockpit. However, the black mecha still stubbornly did not fall. After entering overclocking mode, the Black MX's right shoulder fire control system, which was the only part that did not fall off, flipped out from under the armor. It aimed at the sparking cockpit of the 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha and blasted it. With a boom, the 4th-generation Moon Wolf mecha fell to the ground. Immediately after, the Black MX lifted its heavy mechanical leg without hesitation and stomped on the already deformed cockpit of the Empire mecha. Green smoke billowed and blood flowed out. 0.4 seconds. From the moment the two mecha came into contact to the end of everything, only 4 seconds had passed. The other 9 Empire mecha did not have the time to react, nor did they have the ability to participate in this terrifying mecha battle. They stared at the black mecha that was turning around, and at the burning Moon Wolf mecha beneath its feet. They stood frozen on the mountain path in shock. In the dim cockpit of the Black MX mecha, Jen Shuei's eyes were tightly shut, her long eyelashes fluttering non-stop. Due to the high frequency of the mecha battle, the young girl's face was pale from the concussion. Her brain was in a daze, and she could not speak at all. However, she vaguely knew that she was still alive, while the Empire mecha was dead. Shula took off his helmet. Large amounts of sweat flowed down his forehead, following the smooth simulation system and flowing down to the water level of the cockpit. His face was pale, and a trace of complex emotions appeared in his slightly narrowed eyes. He did not immediately attack the 9 third-generation Empire mecha. This was because he was currently very weak, very tired, and even very hungry. Although the previous mecha battle had only taken 4 seconds, who knew how many controls he had done in those 4 seconds? Through the simulation system, the joystick, and the touchscreen, he had used 3 complex methods to control the Black MX. That was how he had gained the absolute advantage in front of the Empire Ace mecha pilot. However, after the battle, he had used up too much of his stamina and energy. Opening the universal channel, Shula wiped the sweat from his lips and beard. Panting, he spoke to the Iron 7th Division and Du Shaoqing, who were ambushing him in the mountains. Already killed. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.